This episode will close the series with a resounding call for stronger cooperation between stakeholders of better climate adaptation in the broader policy arenas grounded on local narratives and looking at the Conference of the Parties 26 or COP26 as a window of opportunity. And to meet those objectives for today's episode, we shall be guided by the following questions. What is climate finance and what is the role of climate finance? What are the current and emerging initiatives on climate finance that promote better access and accountability? What are the opportunities and promising developments in climate finance and in climate and disaster risk financing and insurance, especially for local stakeholders? And how can the coming COP26 be an opportunity for us to make the changes that need to happen in planning for climate adaptation and making sure that we have the financing to realize all these plans?
All right. So before we get started, we have a few reminders for our guests and viewers. So for those who are joining via Zoom, please change your screen name to your name and organization or office to help us identify you better throughout the session. You can do so by finding your name in the participants list, pressing the More button, and selecting Rename. For documentation purposes, this webinar we'll be recording this. And lastly, our organizers will be keeping everyone on mute during the session to make sure our speakers are heard loud and clear by all of our viewers. Kindly avoid unmuting yourself unless called upon during the open forum. And for questions and comments, feel free to type it in the Q&A box that you can see below your screen. For those who are joining us via Facebook Live, whether you are accessing the live stream via ICSC page or the Embassy of Netherlands in the Philippines page, please feel free to send your comments and questions during the live stream in the comment sections, and our team will monitor each closely and take note of each comment. So later on, we'll be addressing them. And lastly, for more information about the webinar series, you may visit the official platform of CAS 2021. So you can see on the screen the websites and the following Facebook pages. So that would be from ICSC and the Embassy of Netherlands in the Philippines.
Thank you, Angelica. Let's move on to session one. And session one will be on climate and disaster risk financing and the implication of accountability on national policy. For this session, we have a very distinguished panel of guests and speakers. Our first speaker will be the country and the private sector engagement lead of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat. We have with us Dr. Grant Kirkman. We also have with us in this panel a lawyer and a commissioner with the Climate Change Commission, Commissioner Rachel Herrera. Our next speaker will be, another speaker will be the Deputy Executive Director of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, Angelo Kairos de la Cruz. Last but not the least, we will have the Planning Associate for Climate Policy and Insurance of the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, Ms. Victoria Seifert. So welcome to our distinguished panel of speakers. And I would like to thank especially Grant and Victoria, who are joining us from Germany, because it's quite an early start for them today. Well, thank you very much for making time for this. Perhaps we can go to the first presentation by Dr. Grant Kirkman. And as we're waiting for the slide to, good morning, Grant. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to us.
Good morning.
Hello. Yes, well, before we get into your presentation, I'd like to check in with you. This is something that I think we should be doing more as we are, living through this pandemic. So, yeah, I was just wondering, maybe before you get into the meat of your presentation, maybe you can share, maybe one realization that you've had during the pandemic? Like something that you discovered about yourself and how you coped with it.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you for the wonderful invitation also to speak this morning in Bonn and afternoon in Manila. Yes, your question is very pertinent. I think that the biggest insight I've had personally is family is very important, community is very important, and if we can engage at that level, first at the family unit and then the community level, I think we can overcome some of the challenges that we're facing now and will definitely be facing continuing with the climate change era we're living through at the moment. Hopefully we'll come out okay. I'm pretty positive. So yeah, I think community and family are very important.
Yeah, well, thank you, Grant. And maybe we should dive into it with your presentation. Yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Francis. Colleagues, it's a pleasure to speak to you this morning in Bonn and in the afternoon in Asia at the Climate Summit, Adaptation Summit webinar series. As you know, some 5 years ago, nations of the world adopted the Paris Agreement, a covenant of hope for the people of the world. It was a milestone for multilateralism, a declaration that humanity would stand united against and address significant threats to its collective future. However, adoption is not implementation, and much needs to be done and much needs to change. Today, multilateralism, which is convened and assisted by us at the Secretariat, is to a large extent under attack, and we need it where we need it most. As has already been mentioned this morning, a global pandemic continues to change the way we live and work, and the climate emergency is worsening as well. Last year, 2020, was the hottest of the last 3 years on record globally, and the last decade was certainly the hottest in human history. Temperatures this year across the globe are at least 1.5 to 3 degrees above average. And this is not an aberration. This is, as some have mentioned, a new normal. So implementing the Paris Agreement is more than important at the moment. Faced with a global pandemic and its existential climate change emergencies, delays in adapting to the changes, and delays and lack of finance, in particular, capacity building and technology as well, to address the needs of developing countries is critical and urgent at the moment, and will continue to be. That means the pledges that countries, or parties as we call it in the process, that were made before 2020, for example, those outlined in the Cancun pledges, need to be and must be honored and completed. This is especially true for the pledges by developing countries to mobilize 100 billion annually to developing nations by 2020, and also in setting the new goal from 2025 onwards. So the obligations to support the efforts of developing countries cannot be ignored. And everybody has a role to play. This webinar series, and certainly this part of it, really is addressing local community units, local government, regional, and as well as international stakeholders. To what extent can they be providing finance, providing support, and how to access that? So since COP21, developing countries have become increasingly frustrated about what they consider to be a lack of willingness of many to comply with their commitments to support the delivery of finance. Now, this sensitive issue is reflected in the negotiations under various items in the Unfcc process under climate finance, such as the long-term climate finance agenda, the reviews of the financial mechanism and the adaptation fund, and as I've mentioned, the new collective quantified goal on finance and financing for adaptation and loss and damage, which is becoming increasingly more and more vocal and important within the process. as well as transparency. So in other words, the reporting and transparency and the rules for that, as well as for also the implementation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Article 6 being the market and cooperative mechanisms. So COP26 will need to provide clarity on in mobilization and provision of the 100 billion. And it will also be important for shaping the post-2020 climate finance architecture to mobilize climate finance at scale from all sources to meet the needs of developing countries. If we can just go to the first slide, you'll see that, so slide number 2, you'll see that there's a big difference between the Unfcc process and the Paris Agreement. The Unfcc Convention, I should say, outlines that countries are needed to, developed countries are to provide financial resources to developing countries. And then there's a need for adequacy and predictability of those funds. And in particular, also assisting in meeting the costs for adaptation. That was outlined in the Unfcc, the convention instrument. The Paris Agreement, which came later, further defined that developed countries shall and are encouraged to provide finance. So developing countries also are encouraged to do so. So you may find countries that are in the stage of becoming developed countries. But however, developed countries need to take the lead on providing that finance. There needs to be a balance between adaptation and mitigation. And there needs to be a reporting system of what is being provided and what has been received. And the Paris Agreement also outlined the funds, what we call the operating entities of the financial mechanism, the GCF, the GEF, and the Adaptation Fund, to serve as instruments of finance provision. Slide 2 will outline basically the entire, if you could move to slide 2, the slide 2 will outline the entire finance structure under the Unfcc process. So what you have is the mobilization of finance for climate action, which is, as I mentioned, the 100 billion goal. You have the reporting, the oversight, or the monitoring and reporting of climate finance as managed by COP and CMA. And then you have also the delivery mechanisms, as I mentioned, the funds, the GEF, the GCF, etc. And then to assess all of this, the global stocktake looks at how effective this has all been. So that's the entire climate finance architecture under the Unfcc. The next slide will show us the post-2020 climate finance architecture, which is really where the Paris Agreement, as I've mentioned, is addressing all of the issues. As you see in the wider box, it's basically aimed at improving access to and quantity of climate finance, and also setting a new goal for beyond the 100 billion. And part of that is defined in Article 4, in determining the needs. So this is Article 4 of the Convention, I should say, determining the needs of developing countries. Part of it is defined in Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, which is ensuring that all flows of finance are consistent with climate resilience, development, and low greenhouse gas emissions. And in understanding all of this and in setting all these goals, there are 2 reporting mechanisms in the middle, defined under Article 9.5 and 9.7 of the Paris Agreement. So countries are required to report on projected levels of resources being provided to developing countries, and then understanding from the developing countries side what is being delivered. And this includes public and private finance to be reported on. This architecture should enable better climate finance planning at the national level and better foresight as to how to address some of the challenges going forward, as well as the gaps, and in particular in setting priorities. Next slide will show you basically a implementation of some of this work, particularly in the needs part. And this came out through the Bonn conference some 3 years ago, where the Secretariat in particular, ourselves, were asked to look after and help define what those needs may be. And we're assisting over 100 countries now in what's called the Needs-Based Finance Project across 12 different regions. Also in the Philippines at the moment, there is a project being run and being commissioned at the moment for the High-End Corridor. My last slide will basically just talk a little bit about, somebody mentioned, of course, what is climate finance, and there is actually no definition at the moment formally adopted within the process. The closest that the parties have come to on this is outlined in the 2014 assessment of financial flows, and is really quite useful to bear in mind. It defines climate finance as reducing emissions, enhancing sinks, and aims to reduce vulnerability and maintain increasing resilience of human and ecological systems to the negative effects of climate impacts. As I said, it's not necessarily an agreed definition, but it is a good definition to keep in mind when understanding and trying to define what is actual climate finance, what is finance needed to address climate. And the reason for this broadness and this indecision as to what this would be is basically everybody has a slightly different view of the types of finance that are needed to be provided, where they should come from, where they should go to, are they additional and new, and then what is ultimately being financed, direct compensation for actions or compensation for damages. And as I've mentioned, adaptation and loss and damage are very big items now within the negotiation process. Many developing countries are feeling the urgency to address and have to address some of the challenges going forward. So I'll stop there for now, and I thank you for the time.
Well, thank you, Grant. Yeah, well, it's I just remembered in one of our sessions, one of our resource speakers mentioned about the need for the climate planning. It needs to be folded into development planning or vice versa, because it's really not just about reducing emissions or enhancing sinks or increasing resilience. I mean, you cannot talk about that if you don't look at your blueprints for economic development. And thank you for for being very. I think it was really good information. Like, we need the finance so that we can implement the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement seeks to address the urgency of the climate crisis. I think you mentioned a very important thing. It has to be needs-based financing. And so the role of local actors, national governments, I think, it's really important so that, the finance goes to actual needs, identified, articulated by local actors, and not just, just throwing money into things that are nice to see, but, maybe not really needed. I think that's very important that we reduce emissions, enhance the sinks, reduce vulnerabilities, and increase resilience. And I think that's a very good place to start as we move along in our panel with our speakers. Again, thank you, Grant. I hope you'll be with us, and I think we'll have some questions for you from our audience. Yeah, thanks. Over to you, Angelica.
Okay, thank you, Francis and Grant, for that discussion. So we'll now proceed to our next speaker. So good afternoon, Commissioner Rachel Herrera. So firstly, ma'am, thank you for sharing your time with us. We know that you're really busy. You have a lot of commitment. So thank you for sharing your time with us this afternoon, so we can continue the discussion on the climate finance in the Philippines. Just so to personally ask you and check in with you, how did you cope up with the current pandemic, especially that we've been in here for more than a year. So we just want to ask you how what you did during the pandemic and how did you cope up?
Well, thank you for asking that. No, it's probably the first time in a forum that we have this check-in, so much appreciated. And good afternoon to everyone, to Francis who moderated earlier, and also hi to Grant who is in Germany. Good to see everyone. Thanks, Angelica. I'm okay. Personally, I'm doing well considering all that has happened. And we are also managing well in the office. I'm in the office right now, but we're doing skeleton arrangements for staff. But thank you for asking. And I hope you're okay as well, and everyone here online.
Yes. Same with us. We're also at the office, pero skeletal din lang po yung aming system ngayon. So it's good to know that everything is well from your side. So we can continue now the discussion on climate finance. So earlier, Grant provided an international context on what is climate finance. So in the context of the Philippines, how does development financing addresses climate and disaster risk?
Okay, thank you. Development financing here in the Philippines now is, yes, it's the same across the world for developing countries like ours, vulnerable to climate change. We consider financing as essential and among the most critical components of our efforts to build resilience against climate risks. And we are looking at this or doing the work on accessing finance in line with our efforts to formulate good policies and drawing up investment plans and government roadmaps and strategies. But the aspect of finance is especially important, as you know, because it enables us to actually implement and innovate, and all plans will be worth nothing, actually, if we do not have the resources to put them into action. So sometimes it takes creativity, but it takes a focus and discipline also to ensure that a plan has a sustainable, will be sustainable and will be financed all the way to its completion. And as a government representative, speaking on behalf of the Climate Change Commission, traditionally we have been seen as the government rather has been seen as the primary source of funding for adaptation and mitigation. But we know that public sector resources will never be enough because it competes, climate projects and activities compete with social services and health and education and many others. So we view a whole of nation approach always to include businesses and industries, development partners, civil society, local governments, such as those that are present here this afternoon, to work together and support the same goals, whether at the national level, and especially bringing down the resources to the communities where they really should be felt and used, to allow also our local community to be the main decision makers for the measures that they view they can use or are useful, and not just useful, but really respond to their actual needs. So we are living in and trying to survive this pandemic, but as we have seen in trying to survive this crisis, that we need all hands on deck. So multi-sector convergence is important so we can build back better from the severe impacts of COVID, for example, where we see that it does not respect boundaries. And that is the same for what we foresee in the climate crisis as the impacts grow more severe and our people and the economy are both suffering. So certainly the government cannot do it alone, and we view this pandemic as a wake-up call for the public health sector. But eventually, as they say, it's just practicing for the more severe impacts of climate change, and thus we have to consider it an opportunity where we can rethink our strategies and to look far beyond that we integrate sustainability and resilience in our recovery plans.
Yeah. So thank you for that explanation, Commissioner Rachel. So it's good that you already mentioned about multi-stakeholder cooperation. So later on, we will be talking more about that towards the end of the first session. And since you also mentioned the roadmaps, the government roadmaps in the whole of the society approach that you are doing. So, what are the existing climate finance mechanisms in the Philippines? And in particular, what are CCC's initiatives in setting up our climate finance roadmap?
Yes, roadmaps or climate finance initiatives of the CCC include our work together with the Department of Finance, which is the chair of the CCC, to formulate a climate finance framework. And this is ongoing or just starting, but it is linked to what is already the advanced work to formulate a sustainable finance roadmap. And we recognize that for the Philippines to cope with all these emerging challenges, and even climate change is not just emerging, no, we're already suffering from it for the last decade and more, we must transform our society to be environmentally mindful. That is what is in Ambition 2040. And we are aiming that as we scale up climate action, we must recognize and strengthen the linkages for achieving also the sustainable development goals. So our work on the sustainable finance roadmap will include the climate finance framework, and we will ensure that as CCC that climate lens is present. And another initiative is that with the Department of Budget and Management since 2015, we have been strengthening budget tagging in government so that across all sectors, we are able to prepare programs, we are able to fund them and monitor and track and analyze well, this is just at the appropriation level, no, but at the implementation or actual expenditure is still something to work on. But this is across all government and it's included in the General Appropriations Act. So we are able to know annually how much the government is spending on climate change adaptation and mitigation. And one realization in this CCET exercise is that we must continue to improve climate risk data, both from the public and private sectors. So we are pursuing the implementation of a National Climate Risk Management Framework, or NCRMF, and this will include a data ecosystem across various agencies so that we bring together hazard data and mapping and all these that are in custody of various agencies, no, science agencies, so that we improve their availability, their accessibility. And when we have data, we can enable greater investments in adaptation, especially because these are all related to the risks that must be addressed and managed. I would also like to mention that the CCC is the national designated authority to the Green Climate Fund. So we have set up processes together with other agencies to increase access to this fund, and an interagency body, the GCF Technical Working Group, reviews proposals together. These are both concept notes and funding proposals. And I'd like to mention especially that we have on board the Philippine Commission on Women and the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, so that we also ensure that ESG, or environmental and social and governance standards and gender standards are achieved or ensured. No, there are no breaches in terms of proposals that we are seeking to be funded by the GCF. And the GCF country program identifies 9 priority areas where we can develop project proposals. So we now have so far 3 funding proposals approved by GCF. Most recently, it was an ADB ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, focusing on mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions from energy, from transport, from forestry and land use, from infrastructure. So this fund of, it's multi-country, it's 300 million, but there are 6 countries participating, including us. So that translates to more or less $60 million for the Philippines, where we can submit sub-projects on those sectors. This is to be managed by the ADB, and together with DOF, we will call in for proposals to be pitched on these sectors. And last but not least, we have finalized the submission of our nationally determined contributions for approval of our principles. And this, as you know, will be our investment plan onwards to 2030 to transform our sectors towards low carbon development.
Okay. So
I
that's
stop
a lot
there,
of,
Angelica.
yeah, that's a lot of good plans. There are a lot of policy developments, not just only with the CCC, but with the different sectors or different agencies in the government that you work with. So this is really promising, and we look forward to the implementation in of this roadmaps that you've mentioned earlier. So and it's really good that you also highlighted the importance of data coming from different agencies as well, because we can also relate that to our previous episode episode to where we discuss the emerging areas of research, especially both in local and national context, in highlighting their importance, the importance of science in having an evidence-based policy development. So, lastly, how are the national and subnational policies and plans translated into localized climate action through development finance?
Yes, as you know, plans and policies are very important because they are the vision, and then we look for the financing to enable them. So very early on in 2012, the country adopted a national climate change action plan. Everyone is familiar with it. We have 7 priority areas for building long-term country resilience. Um, Stakeholders are asked or have roles to play in this NCCAP priorities. And if I can enumerate them, we have food security, water sufficiency, ecological and environmental stability, human security, climate smart industries, and knowledge and capacity development, and finally, sustainable energy. So we are looking to use financing for the programs that will help support the achievement of our goals in the NCCAP. And indeed, we're just only trying to update. No, we're still updating the NCCAP so that we are able to measure our progress. It's going to be 10 years next year, this NCCAP. And then we have the updated Philippine Development Plan formulated by NEDA, where we also took part, and this was just published this year. So we have actually enough. I think we have enough consultations done on roadmaps, and it's just that COVID has really lent a different tenor to what should now be the more urgent push for a green recovery. So I think when we draw up plans, we should be more conscious really of how green recovery in terms of ensuring that our um, economic investments from now onwards are also considering, environmental and social safeguards, ensuring investments that reduce emissions and protect biodiversity. Um, I can also cite as an example the People Survival Fund, the PSF, which is our annual adaptation grant. And so far, the 6 approved PSF projects are contributing to at least 4 of the NCCAP priority areas. And this goes as well with our GCF review, because when we review through our screening and evaluation tool, the NCCAP is the primary reference. And this kind of financing will allow our agencies, our local government units to scale up climate action, where they should not have to choose, between having food to eat or education or health, and building resilience, because these should all go together. And as we already know, COVID also has been linked to the need to protect our wildlife. And so we have to put more pressure also on developing plans and bringing in financing for nature-based solutions, which have been seen to create jobs and will deliver restoration to our ecosystems, which can then ensure food security and so on. So these are all the things that we have come to realize in the last year with this crisis. And so again, a whole of nation approach in financing and planning, and always directed towards a greener perspective. Thank you, Angelica.
Thank you, Commissioner Rachel. So you already mentioned the PSF later on to our viewers, since we already have viewers from the local government units. You can know more about it from the session two speakers. So thank you very much, Commissioner Rachel, for highlighting the role of CCC in the current and emerging initiatives. You mentioned a lot actually on climate finance to promote better access, accountability, and relevance to accelerate local climate action. So thank you once again, Commissioner Rachel Herrera, for sharing your time. So I hope you could stay a bit so that we could address the questions coming from our participants in Zoom and via Facebook Live.
Yes, thank you. My pleasure. Good afternoon to all. Thank you, Sir Francis.
Thank you, Commissioner Herrera. Thank you very much. Thank you, Angge. Let's move on to our next speaker. We have Kairos de la Cruz. But before we get to the take of the discussions, let me just check in with Kairos. Maybe you would like to share, something that you realized during the pandemic. What helped you during the various lockdowns that we've had in the last year?
The lockdown so far. We've been lucky enough to be part of the small group of people, I think, who get the time to step back and reflect on things, and not worry about daily subsistence every day. And during one of those, I think, two of my most distinct reflections that we've been taking a lot of things granted for a very, very long time. We've been working, in remote and in sort of skeleton hybrid systems for more than a year now, and there's nothing physical, person-to-person interaction. Nothing can beat that in terms of pushing forward ambition and trying to implement them and then put them into reality. Of course, Zoom meetings and online events are, I think, the best substitute, but nothing beats personal, face-to-face interaction. And the last reflection I have is more personal. It's I think kids, family can balance out everything in your life. For the past year, I've never been closer to home and to my two kids, and it's that's something really amazing and fulfilling at the same time.
Thank you. Okay, so we heard Grant Kirkman and Commissioner Rachel Herrera talk about what's being done to increase access to climate finance. Grant told us about mechanisms at the international level. Commissioner Rachel Herrera talked about what's being done at the national level, looking for funds that can be used both for building up climate resilience, and of course as part of our development, meeting our development goals. What is the importance, or why is it important to balance increased access to finance and increasing accountability for those finances?
For a very long time, we've been saying that climate finance is crucial in identifying the development pathways of a lot of developing countries, and even developed countries to some extent. But even if it's really crucial and really important, it's very limited. It's a reality that we have to face. It's a reality that developing countries maybe have to think more often compared to our developed country neighbors. Because of course, in developing countries, you have to balance out allocations across the various sectors. And if you can, ensure that your climate financing would not equate to taking away money, for example, from education or health, that would go a long, long way. Because ultimately, I think climate change is not just a sector. We believe that it shouldn't be tackled separately from other sectors because it encompasses all of these things. And I think, in case in point, on just quickly on that, I mean, for example, in Giwan, Eastern Samar, they were able to show that climate change also impacts educational attainment of their youth because the increasing number of days wherein they have to deal with floods would equate to losses in terms of school days. Therefore, literacy and the chances to learn inside the classroom also decreases. And lastly, I think a general comment is that accountability and access in a climate finance ecosystem should be treated, we should strive for a symbiotic relationship between the two of them. Accountability, and I know that Grant is quite well aware of the negotiations, and even Commissioner Rachel, that for a while accountability has been seen as an imposition from developed countries, and maybe that's the general agreement on that by in terms of negotiations. But we keep on saying that it shouldn't be an imposition. We shouldn't look at it as an imposition because ultimately it would position us better to access more finance if we have enough fiduciary standards and safeguards within the country. And this is quite true as well, even for the PSF. I mean, those who are able to access PSF, a major consideration is that they're able to manage funds and that they have enough safeguards to ensure that these funds would actually go where it's intended to go.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point. Grant mentioned needs-based financing. Like if you have expressed needs and you get financing for it, I think it's only fair that you are accountable to it, because the last thing you would want is finance going to things that are not the most urgent or not the most important. Well, ICSC, the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, recently published a report on climate finance tracking. Would you like to share some of the major findings and what are the policy implications of that?
Thank you for pointing that, for singling out that report. We were quite excited for that report to be launched because we think it will sort of rock the boat a bit in terms of bringing out what's actually happening on the ground and what are its implications in the international scale of things on climate finance. The research was not only done by ICSC. I mean, for the Philippines, it was done by ICSC, but it was also done in 6 other countries across the world, in Asia and Africa in particular. And globally, if I would put it in a sentence, globally there is massive overreporting of climate change financing, particularly on adaptation, as could be seen on the OECD reporting by developed countries. So what the report did was we selected a handful of projects based on different criteria, such as the amount of committed finance, the availability of information, such as gender tags, and local partners of implementation, so that we can go and dive deeper, doing local tracking work and do local tracking work for these funds. So globally, there is massive over-reporting across all sites, across all country implementations. Nationally, we are missing a lot because we also have a lot of over-reporting. This only means, this doesn't mean that money was used in a very corrupt manner. It's just that we're accepting reporting that we're getting adaptation funds, which are not necessarily used for adaptation in the Philippines. And just to build on that point, I mean, for the Philippines, for example, we recorded somewhere between $770 million US dollars to $785 million worth of over-reporting. And that's roughly 40 billion pesos worth of climate finance, which were reported as something that trying to help us build the resilience, but was actually used for other things. Yeah, and 93% of the total finance that we tried to track For the Philippines, 93% of those came in as loans. And it's been known, it's been articulated several times already that as developing countries, we do push that adaptation and even loss and damage to some extent should not be extended as loans and should be extended as grants or at the very least highly concessional loans from developed countries. Yeah, and last point on that, I mean, just to be super clear, I mean, the report only covers a quarter of the climate finance database that ICSC is currently analyzing. We do have roughly 10 billion US dollars worth of commitment for adaptation and mitigation. And the research that you just pointed out covers roughly 2.1 billion of that.
Thank you for that. I just want to note that I've already seen one question in our chat box, and I encourage our viewers to, if you have questions, just pop it in, and we'll find time to answer those. I mean, accountability sounds like a very scary thing for some, but I think the key question is, who are we accountable to? I mean, it's not. I don't think it's it's one NGO asking accountability from, say, agencies or government. Because if we think about it, I mean, addressing the climate crisis is, we should be thinking of the next generation and the generation after that. So we're trying to be accountable to those who are yet to be born or to those who are just born. Because if we don't do this right, and I think that's the gravity of our responsibility and our privilege, actually, that this generation will be able to influence how the next generation will live and the next generation after that. If we do this correctly, they'll have a better deal. If we fail, then it's almost like condemning them to a really bad future. Apologies for my op-ed, my little op-ed there, but I'm just moved by the need for action, the efforts to provide finance, and the need to balance it with accountability. Anyway, so what else is in store? What other initiatives do you have to address? Well, first of all, what do you see are the gaps? And what are the initiatives that are being taken to address these gaps?
Globally, the movements have been quite exciting, as mentioned by Grant and shared by Sir Lando from UNFCCC as well. That needs-based financing is becoming more prominent, and I think that would be a crucial turning point for developing countries such as the Philippines. Because then, if you're demand-driven in terms of accessing climate finance, country ownership would be higher as well. Projects would be more sustainable, and maybe what we actually get is something we actually need, and it's something that we're actually been trying to fundraise for a very long time. Nationally, what Rachel already shared are really important points. With the sustainable finance framework, with the climate finance movement as well, within CCC and with the Department of Finance, I think you can fill in a very crucial gap in the whole accountability ecosystem that we have right now, which is basically having a country-led monitoring system of these funds. Because try to imagine that, I mean, last year we don't have a COP physically, but I'm quite sure that, the next COP is just around the corner. So imagine going to the negotiation, and your negotiators are blind about how much are you actually getting, how much of those that you're getting are actually relevant to what you're trying to negotiate. I think that would force us on a backpedaling forever. But if we do have a country-led monitoring system, a country-led accountability system, I think that would position us in a better position in terms of accessing more finance and pushing for more policy reforms, particularly on reporting and in resource mobilization for developing countries.
Well, thank you for that, Kairos. I see another question popping up. I think we're generating a lot of curiosity about how we will operationalize demanding accountability while increasing access to climate finance. Well, thank you for that. And now I pass you on to our next speaker, who will be introduced by Angelica. I hope you can stay around and for our Q&A.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Francis and Kairos, for that discussion. So right now we will have Victoria with us. So thank you. First of all, thank you, Victoria, for sharing your time with us. We know that it's really early from where you're from. You're based in Bonn, right?
That's right. Yeah. Good morning and afternoon. Angelica.
So thank you very much. So Victoria is from the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, and she will be discussing more on climate and disaster risk financing and insurance with us. So um, following the introductions from the earlier speakers, we just want to check on you. How did you cope up with the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Angelica, and I think it's nice to do the check-in. And I definitely agree, with what Kairos has been saying, what Grant has been saying, that we've been in the lucky position, to reflect actually on the pandemic and to retreat to our families. And I can only second, many of the things that have been said. I think I haven't been able to spend as much time with my family for the past 10 or 12 years since I left for my undergrad, right? So I definitely came to appreciate that a lot more and the importance of it. And I think in terms of less serious observations, I also realized that despite my age, I'm more of a silver surfer in the digital space. And I definitely learned a lot about using digital tools, to stay connected to people in a very active way, even though that doesn't replace the face-to-face time. But I improved my soft skills there, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I think we all have the same wish that everything gets better soon, so we can go back to our usual ways. So for now, we'll start on the discussion. So first, what is the broader regional and international lay of the land for CDRFI? So CDRFI is climate and disaster risk financing and insurance. So what are the salient issues and recommendations?
Yeah, I think to give you my perspective, while disaster risk finance has been around for quite some time, and I think countries such as the Philippines, being an archipelago in the Pacific and in the Pacific Ring of Fire on top of that, as well as, Caribbean governments, where the first sort of regional risk pool has been conceived back in 2007, are no strangers to the topic. But we definitely have seen an uptake of disaster risk finance work and initiatives with the launch of the G7 Resilience Initiative back in 2015, and then the V20 G20-led Resilience Global Partnership in 2017. And from that also a proliferation of further initiatives that focus on subcomponents, for example, early action and preparedness, or recent push for more better access to data and modeling. So I do think that on the upside of things, we can definitely say that we've seen a growing supply of solution providers and disaster risk finance solutions, or at least the attempt to build disaster risk finance solutions. At the same time, however, I wouldn't say that this supply side push is sufficiently informed by what the demand side would need. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the COVID crisis now has given a boost to disaster risk finance in a way that it's now very evident that several of the supply side driven solutions aren't sufficiently working for vulnerable countries yet. And this comes with a significant impact for our global economy as well. And it has also drawn attention to the fact that underlying vulnerabilities, underlying inequity and institutional weaknesses matter as much for safeguarding fiscal space as disaster risk finance. And that translating into, determining a country's or people's capacity to manage catastrophe and to also ensure debt sustainability, which is another issue on the rise again, especially for smaller economies. And overall, I think what the COVID crisis has done for the disaster risk finance debate is to firstly boost government's attention and demand for needs responsive pre-arranged financing, as well as for proactive risk planning, and to also heighten governments, vulnerable country governments, and the international community's attention to the issue of confounding risk, right? So we've seen that, for example, Fiji and the Philippines have been hit by the pandemic first, and then there was typhoon after typhoon and tropical cyclone, when countries spent down their emergency resources on COVID, and then had to deal with those crises on top, which sort of showed the importance of reliable international support for disaster risk and disaster risk financing. And secondly, I think it also really made us understand the importance of having a demand-informed supply of solutions and embedding disaster risk finance into intervention, into a more programmatic approach that takes a multi-sectoral, multi-actor, and multi-level perspective, instead of viewing disaster risk finance in isolation or only linked to adaptation, which also goes along, with, I think, broader shifts that we need when we talk about climate change, where climate change considerations aren't an add-on to our planning processes, but are basically business as usual. And I think if you ask me about salient issues, or if I had to name 3 salient issues for now, which are relevant, for this region, but which also transcend to the international sphere, I would basically, respond by asking 3 questions, with the first one really being, how do we make disaster risk finance? And that's regardless of whether it's, contingent credits, savings, or risk transfer, or whether it's at the micro meso levels, or whether it's, at the macro levels when we talk about regional risk pools. How do we make that more sustainable? So how do we make it more needs responsive, designing real value add products for the ground level to expand beyond the pilots of the past, but also to expand the membership of regional risk pools? How do we make it more affordable? And in the context of insurance, also, how will we deal with the limits of insurability, right, if climate change continues unabated? And the second question is, how do we enhance, risk knowledge, so access to data modeling and decision-making tools, and how do we actually translate that then into national planning processes, and most importantly, into public, knowledge and awareness on climate risk and disaster risk finance? And then the last question, I think, is the most obvious one, and it's so simple and yet so difficult, and basically asks where the additional support that we will need for disaster risk finance will come from. Where will it come from reliably, from public and private sources? And how do we situate, track, and count those funds in the context of climate finance?
Thank you, Victoria. I think the questions that you actually mentioned, we will be discussed later on. We will dig deeper on those salient issues. You also mentioned the importance of multi-stakeholder cooperation, which we will also deal with it later on. So hopefully you can also expand on that. And another thing you've mentioned, different initiatives from various networks, governments, stakeholders, and institutions on CDRFI. So with that, what are the regional or international initiatives to address the gaps and challenges on CDRFI? What are the possible gains and opportunities, especially if we have an engagement here in the Philippines?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Angelica, and I think it's a very important one. So I already mentioned one, right, which is the V20 G20-led Resilience Global Partnership, which is, as the name already said, a global multi-actor partnership on disaster risk finance, or on comprehensive approaches towards disaster risk finance. And it's co-chaired by members from the G20, as well as members from the V20, which is the vulnerable group of ministers of finance from 48 different countries. And if we sort of step down the level or look at parallel partnerships to that, we also do have a partnership that we're working together with ICSC, for example, but also other civil society organizations and academia from Germany, but most importantly from the Caribbean countries, from the African region, as well as other countries from the Southeast Asian region, which focuses on strengthening, the knowledge and the involvement of communities, community organizations and civil society organizations in those countries, in the global and regional debates on disaster risk finance. And if I should speak about challenges or gaps or opportunities related to that, coming back to the question of affordability, right, which goes into the question of premium financing, we can see that for 2021 we can expect, the discussions around premium financing and reliable disaster risk finance in general to take up in the context of the Insurance Global Partnership, but also in the context of the G7 and the sort of G7 meetings and outcomes this year, hopefully. We've also seen calls from other actors on reforming international crisis finance. And I do think that, for example, the Philippines as a country and as a member of the Insurance Global Partnership, but also ICSC as a member of the Insurance Global Partnership and the governing body of the partnership, really have an opportunity to bring regional perspectives and to push a regional perspective to work towards ensuring that the international development community takes into account what's important from your perspective when we speak about premium financing, when we speak about affordability. I also think that there is definitely space this year and the years to come to push more on needs responsiveness and public awareness. And this is where I also see a role for the multi-actor partnership that we're working on, and especially for the partners in the countries such as ICSC to bring, the ground perspectives into the international debates, into product design processes. And with that, or in order to do that, get access to tools and trainings or communication materials that help and support better understanding and uptake by the communities. And we're also working together with ICSC and our other partners from the partnership on co-creating a training that addresses those needs. And going beyond that, I think that there is space and need to push, for example, the Insurance Global Partnership to make available broader support for country-led public awareness and knowledge campaigns. And lastly, I think partnerships such as the Insurance Global Partnership and our multi-actor partnership within that also give the opportunity for civil society organizations to better understand and identify access points to the international implementation architecture, that being, for example, the Insurance Solutions Fund, as well as understanding how civil society organizations in the country can work to support the V20-led sustainable insurance facility that's looking to enhance access to insurance for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, especially by working through regional and local insurers under the leadership of the national finance ministries.
All right. So we really see these gaps in opportunities that you've mentioned as more relevant as we discussed this in the context of the current pandemic. And these partnerships are critical to address these issues for us to better understand the access to this type of finances. So you've been discussing a lot on the international context of CDRFI. But for the case of the Philippines, how can our country benefit from mainstreaming, since you also mentioned the mainstreaming of CDRFI and the development plans and policies? So if you can give us also the enabling mechanisms and factors in mainstreaming CDRFI locally.
Yeah, Thank you for the question. And Angelica, I think it's a great question. I can only add from my perspective, right? I think there are several people on the call here who have a lot of additions on the Philippine context, especially, you know, being based and being from the region, and me being based here in Bonn. But I think if we start with key enabling factors, especially when we talk about development plans and policies, is knowledge, right? And in the context of disaster risk finance, that means data, that means modeling tools that allow governments not only to understand their resilience baselines, basically where they are at right now, and what kinds of sort of macroeconomic damages and costs governments can expect under dynamic climate scenarios. But we also need tools that allow them to understand the cost and benefits of different combinations of risk reduction, adaptation, and disaster risk finance investments to decide the most cost-effective resilience investment portfolios over time. And while I do believe that great strides have been made, vulnerable country governments still face several issues, right? First of all, the kind of models that I described are very complex, and the ones that I'm aware of still focus on the asset level when estimating losses and damages, and less so on the output level and the price effects that are important for macroeconomic planning. And secondly, we also need more high resolution and localized downscaled models to give, you know, the concrete information that government needs to make informed decision about planning. And thirdly, you know, a lot of the data or the models are still siloed, you know, within different processes, and we need to integrate, you know, efforts within country, but also globally to enhance access to data and modeling. So I basically think in order to unlock, you know, to unlock the benefits of mainstreaming disaster risk finance into development, we need to unlock the access to data and modeling first. And that being said, I do, however, believe that when we look at the region, you know, the Philippines is already one of the regions, a poster child for mainstreaming disaster risk and disaster risk finance into national development planning. At the national level, you do have the Disaster Risk Management Act, right? You do have the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Framework, the funds that come with that, and that also being translated into localized frameworks and you know, government revenue allotments to go to disaster risk finance on a local level. You can also see it in the Philippines national planning instruments when we speak about their, for example, their MSME development plan, as well as the Philippines overall development plan, where resilience and disaster risk finance are mentioned as key concerns. And I'm sure that those plans have their challenges, especially when translating it into action on the ground. But I do believe that the Philippines, you know, can provide regional learnings for other countries in the region. For example, Vietnam and Indonesia, when it comes to treating disaster risk finance and MSMEs as part of national planning. But I also believe that partnerships such as the multi-actor partnership on disaster risk finance can provide a great platform for such regional learning, and can also provide a platform to further drive regional cooperation, political cohesion, and solidarity to also bring forward, you know, regional risk pools, or to also cooperate on, for example, integrating climate risk into regional trade agreements, trade and service agreements, which is an important area, I think. And lastly, when we think about mainstreaming disaster risk finance, the important thing to remember are spillover effects, right? And I think countries such as the Philippines should really capitalize on the opportunity that presents itself with integrating disaster risk finance and the positive spillover effects it can create for financial inclusion, for financial systems development, for industrial development, and making, you know, financial systems and investments more climate resilient overall.
Thank you, Victoria. We picked up a lot of lessons along your discussion, especially when you pointed out the different mechanisms on how we can mainstream CDRFI here in the Philippines. So you've mentioned that we have to unlock access to data and models in course, the importance of knowledge sharing, not only locally, nationally, but also at the regional level. So later on in the session two, I think one of our speakers will also complement your discussion on CDRFI, because she will be also sharing the importance of data in mainstreaming CDRFI. So thank you very much for sharing your time with us. So I hope you stay after, so we can also address some of the questions, general questions for all of the speakers and the ones coming from our participants and viewers. Back to you, Francis.
All right. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Victoria. Well, I think let's make some time. Let's give some time for the Q&A. Our chat box it's been busy. I think we also have some questions posted on Facebook. Well, let me just read some of the questions. I hope you don't mind. Well, there's this question. How do we make sure during private partnership engagements that development and climate financing are not mixed up with dirty funds coming from coal, mining, and other extractive operations in the guise of corporate social responsibilities? And, while enjoying tax credits, who conducts due diligence? And Commissioner Rachel Herrera has responded to that, and let me just read. For projects under the Green Climate Fund, Environmental, Social Governance, plus Gender Safeguard, as well as a policy to ensure Indigenous people's rights, are strictly applied during review of project proposals, including for the private sector. Also, private financial institutions may be accredited by the board to serve as conduit of GCF after their portfolio is assessed to have zero coal or moving to divest from coal. So that's in relation to that question about coal. One way of putting it is, can they also access green climate funds or the climate funds under the GCF? And so there's a board that conducts due diligence. Then there's another question which is along the same lines, but it's referring to an expansion of a pipeline for fossil fuels. And the question is, how do these priorities compromise or affect our sustainable climate and development finance agenda? And I see Commissioner Herrera still typing an answer. Again, just to say thank you very much for our attendees this afternoon, our participants. Well, thank you for making time. I'm still waiting for some of the questions to come in. Angelica, do you have some questions with you?
Yeah. First, before I ask the questions, maybe our speakers can also open their cameras. All right. Thank you very much. So as Francis mentioned, we already have some questions here in our Zoom, and maybe if some of them were already answered by Commissioner Rachel, but maybe our speakers can also add to the answers on how do we make sure that during private partnership engagements that development and climate finance is not using mixed up with dirty funds. So just in case some of our speakers would also want to add on to that. I think that the response from Commissioner Rachel is already enough. So I'll just pose another question for everyone to answer, since earlier during the discussion, a lot of you also mentioned the importance of multi-actor and multi-stakeholder cooperation in accelerating all of these initiatives. So what are the opportunities for cooperation to ensure that climate strategies are science and evidence-based with local grounding through climate finance? So I guess I will start with Grant to answer that question.
Sure. Do you want to just repeat the question? I think I had a bit of a break in the line at the time.
Sure. So what are the opportunities for cooperation to ensure that climate strategies are science and evidence-based with local grounding through climate finance?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's quite a broad question and a good question too. Fundamentally, you just have to open the window of your house or door anywhere in the world right now, and the science is hitting you in the face. We're seeing certainly in Europe a very, very different world. Things are warming, are cooling, are getting drier. The summers are much drier. So the science is there, but I think everybody is feeling the change. It's almost as if you just have to step outside to feel it. And at the end of the day, planning, and as many have mentioned this morning, awareness of what can be planned and what tools can be used and what data needs to flow and be available in order to plan correctly, and the fully inclusiveness of that planning is key. And this is something that we see certainly in the negotiation process, is if parties and countries and stakeholders and observers don't feel fully included in the discussion, there is never a unity around the decision. And so it's really important to create that community space where it allows for all to contribute. I think it's been really useful, the pandemic period, because it's allowed people to contribute in a very different way, certainly non-contact way, but virtually. A lot of more people are being able to be able to spend time on these fora, and I've been speaking on many of different fora, as many of my colleagues too. We've seen a greater number of participants included than we've seen also, certainly in some of the regions we work in. Typically, people would not be able to attend particular meetings because of the travel restrictions, or they couldn't get a budget to travel. But that's a lot different now. People are able to attend and listen in and contribute. And I think if we can have a blended approach going forward on that, it would be very effective. There is space for personal contact, but I think there's a the virtual platform that we're using right now, or with its limitations, does allow for a greater inclusiveness of certainly stakeholders would typically not have a voice. This is, of course, assuming everybody has internet access and accessibility. So there, I'm saying, local community, indigenous people, gender issues, issues that we're not fully aware of, land use, agriculture, forestry. Everything's connected. The entire ecosystem, as Comrade Rachel mentioned as well, destruction of the ecosystem is integrally related to climate change, integrally related to the pandemic. We're seeing they're basically just effects of what we're doing to our ecosystem. Nature-based solutions, key as well. Addressing some of these issues with mitigation-based finance, yes, but adaptation finance needs to be, to a large extent, highly concessional, if not grant-based initially, and then, from then on become more mainstreamed. And insurance too, as Victoria has mentioned, key aspect for providing that basic cover. But the biggest form of cover on insurance is really the resilience, the ability for countries to be able to step in and at a local level be able to adjust quickly, and they understand the local conditions better. I think the larger funds and the larger insurance tools are key, but they need to be sort of almost the last resort. Most of that cover needs to come at a local and small scale level. We're seeing this certainly in the Pacific Islands, in the Caribbean islands, a lot of work being done on local insurance policy and local means to address and cope with adaptation. I'll stop there.
Okay, maybe Kai could also add on to that.
Okay, this feels like a quiz. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Grant, for providing a broad context on the topic. I mean, I think I can share something practical that ICSC has been doing for the past few years. And this is opening up several examples of how multi-stakeholders cooperation platforms can be established in the LGU and local regional levels. We think that climate is, I mean, despite the decades that it's been talked about, it's still relatively new in terms of how it can be integrated to the local plans and to the local strategies of our local governments and local communities. And this is an opening that we can take full advantage of. And we've seen it work. I mean, I keep on saying, I mean, the video at the start of this webinar, I mean, you've seen examples from Coron, Bantayan, and Giwan in Eastern Samar, wherein, you know, most of the solutions are not necessarily coming from just one source or the LGU team. These solutions are the solutions that the LGUs are now espousing came from a wide range of actors, including indigenous people's technologies, including, you know, academic, very academic specific studies proposed by state universities and colleges. In short, everyone has a role to play, and I think, as Grant said, maybe, you know, we just need to keep on opening up our windows and doors and be on the lookout for these opportunities.
Well, thank you. But we have another question, and this is from Pete. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but he's from the Netherlands, from the Netherlands and Luxembourg, and this relates to COP. He was at the COP23 in Bonn in 2017 on the invitation by the Fiji government and financed by the German government. There were lots of initiatives that were announced there, and Piet is asking, you know, in 2021, his observations that the funds have been, you know, slow in coming out, mostly because of a lack of finances. He's interested to know any other experiences, and maybe we can also ask, like, what can we, you know, what is the opportunity being presented to us by COP26 to maybe address this gap?
Can I answer that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. For COP26, we've already lost 1 year of a COP. We lost the chance to meet last year, but we will surely, when we are at COP in November this year, we will have to be more loud, make this louder call for adaptation finance, really, for our countries across the developing world, here in the Asia Pacific, especially, that is one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world and the most impacted. The Philippines was number 4 in the Global Climate Risk Index for a period of 20 years. So we're looking at this COP as a way to finally ask what is due, the adaptation finance that must really reach the communities. And that on the other side, it's now asking governments from the developed countries to make sure to come prepared to COP with their enhanced commitments, because we are already 1 year away from the 10 years, the critical decade of 2030, where we must be able to reduce emissions by 45%. And what has been done between the last COP and for the 2-year period. So 2 things are reduced emissions, drastic emissions plans that have been implemented for the last 2 years for the developed countries and for the vulnerable communities. Where is the adaptation finance? Because there was a striking finding from the Global Climate Adaptation Summit in January that, in fact, only 10% of adaptation finance reaches communities. So where does the 90% go? They must be stuck somewhere in policy, in programming. But actually, the local actors who need them the most, who know best what to do in their own frontline context, they need the money to decide quick and most effectively for their own situations. So those 2 items for COP, I think, are the most important. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Others, would you like to weigh in on that? What does COP26 present to us in terms of opportunity, and what should we do? Those who are calling for increased access, enhanced, increased accountability. What should we do?
I think just very briefly from my side, right, when we look at COP26, even though that may be a bit optimistic, is the question of, financing for example, disaster risk, right? We do have mitigation finance, we do have adaptation finance, but when it comes to where we would locate, disaster risk finance, which is in the area of sudden onset events, and which under the UNFCCC comes with the negotiations on loss and damage and financial support for loss and damage. I do think COP26, is critical to try at least and make some advances towards understanding what loss and damage finance would actually be. I mean, we do have already these difficulties when we have to delineate adaptation finance from development finance, and those difficulties will become, I think, even harder when we speak about delineation of adaptation finance and loss and damage finance. But we do need to try and make progress, and also make sure that loss and damage finance, is additional to adaptation finance, while adaptation finance, is currently quite underfunded or away from hitting that target that we've set. So I do think COP26 and the COPs after that are an important opportunity to keep pushing, to keep trying to advance the debate, with the perspective, that things will probably take time. But that's my 2 cents in terms of COP26. And I think with regards to, the questions on initiatives that came out of the Fiji COP in 2017 back in Bonn, the V20 G20-led Insurance Global Partnership is one of those initiatives that was announced there, right? And by now hasn't quite hit their targets yet, are in a good way, but hasn't quite hit the targets yet. But I think that's not only due to the fact, that the funding may not have been available, because I think it has been available. It's also due to the fact that we need, more demand drivenness in the formation of such initiatives. The V20 were part of the formation, I think, did a great deal in making sure this is needs responsive, but going forward, we need even more than that to make sure that we build, the prerequisites for disaster risk finance.
Thank you to our speakers. And then there's of time, there are still a lot of questions in the Q&A box. So if the speakers can also access it, maybe you could also provide your questions, your answers in the Q&A box. Moving forward, we want to ask all of our speakers to provide a quick main takeaway, or just for 1 to 2 sentences, or on what you want to share with all of our audience right now, what you want to share with the multidisciplinary community, tuning into our discussion for continuing discussion and efforts on the topics discussed today. So who would want to start? I can call on Kairos for to be the first one to give his key takeaway.
Okay, I sort of expected that. Thank you for the pass, Angelica. I think the key takeaway from me and here in sharing after sharing this panel with our esteemed guests is, I think it's high time for us to start backing up our narratives and our call for increased ambition, increase in financing, with the things that we can do from our side of things. I mean, from the developing country side of things, from a vulnerable country side of things, and that would entail a lot of work, a lot of baselining, and I think it's good that on the participant list, like, we have a lot of participants from various institutions, from academic institutions in particular, because this is high time for everyone to chime in and sort of provide their expertise, so that we can back up our demands by establishing clearly the things that we need and how we plan to implement whatever program we have in mind. And I think as NGOs, as civil society, ICSC, together with friends, can keep on pushing for more accountability in the government by extending a helping hand. I mean, whatever we have, we're more than willing to share with the initiatives of CCC and DOF. And maybe, that would be a good start for more cooperation on climate finance access and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Kairos. Commissioner Rachel?
There. Thank you. Yes, just as a takeaway, I'd like to thank everyone. I thank you, ICSC, and the partners for organizing this webinar. And as we are still one of the most vulnerable countries, and we are still facing so many risks from climate and disasters, we should continue to combine our efforts both from the national and local capacities combined, and we will definitely source more international climate financing based on our call for climate justice. So our role in the national government will be to continue the work on harmonizing the data so that the work is science evidence-based, and we will need also the support of local governments to bring in the ground knowledge and the local context. And then for financing, we agree that there should be metrics as presented by Kairos. We need to track better what is coming in and what the actual impacts are for on the ground. So these, I think, are our immediate priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rachel. Victoria?
Yeah, I will try and be very quick. And yes, it is a quiz, Kairos. Let's see who wins in the end. No, I think my key takeaways, I mean, listening to Commissioner Herrera as well as Grant, as well as Kairos, right? I do think that we all agree, that we need to make advances when it comes to evidence-based planning, when it comes to risk data, when it comes to the models that we need, and an important point that Kairos made, right, to make sure that those models and the knowledge and the methods are also informed, by institutions within vulnerable countries and aren't sort of imported, from the international sphere. So I do think that's an important takeaway to make, national planning more legitimate and also more accepted at the national level. I also think that disaster risk finance, despite having potentials to create positive spillover effects and picking up on a point that Grant made, it's only a means of last resort, right? It's when the limits of adaptation are reached or breached. And when looking at disaster risk finance, we should look at it in a programmatic, way, in a way that it can create spillover effects, that it can capitalize, or basically, let's say, accelerate and advance risk reduction and adaptation actions and mainstream that into, overall development, as Commissioner Herrera has also described when talking about, the NDC. Yeah, I think I leave you with that in terms of my two main key takeaways. And thank you again for having me. And I think this was a great panel.
Thank you, Victoria. And last but not the least, your key takeaway, Grant.
Yeah, also thanks from my side, and great to see some familiar faces, in particular Rachel, Victoria and Kairos. Also, thanks for mentioning Lando. He's busy recovering in the hospital. We've heard he's in good health, so that's great. And thanks for those thoughts. From my side, I should say there's sort of 3 or 4 points I could talk about as takeaways here. Primarily, first of all, access to climate finance. Okay, number 1. Finance. Number 2, finance for adaptation and resilience. That's what I've heard here clearly this afternoon. Finance for nature-based and nature solutions. And then I've also heard about coherence of data and approaches to climate impacts. And I think those 3 or 4 points are probably sort of major takeaways for me in this discussion. Fortunately, the COP presidency is thinking around these lines too. So we're likely to see some of this dynamic coming into the design and discussions around climate finance at COP26. I might add that the COP26 climate finance agenda items, there are actually 16 on the table. So it's a very, very packed agenda with lots of issues. And as speakers have mentioned already, those 4 points, I would say, are key. The enabling factor is going to be coherence on approaches and data to climate finance and what is flowing, what's needed. So, needs-based determination and strategic planning from countries. And now we're hearing already in this session, excellent work done by Com Rachel's team, and we're seeing that across the globe in the needs-based finance project as well, which we're helping to facilitate from the Secretariat side. So it's been a great session, and good to get up really early and enjoy the time with you. So thanks very much.
Thank you to all of our speakers. As you've mentioned, this is actually not a quiz. There are no losers, just all winners. And thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Back to you, Francis.
Well, I'm really tempted to give my takeaways, and I just want to remember a few things. Climate finance, just to reiterate, climate finance should be about reducing emissions. It should be about enhancing our sinks, carbon sinks. It should be about reducing vulnerability, and should be increasing resilience. And we can be accountable by making this measurable. We should be able to report on it, and we should be able to validate it. That's when the science and the research would come in, because really it's the science is there, the mathematics is already there, the policies, and I think the intentions are there. And I think when we implement it, we just have to make sure that we can hold ourselves accountable, not just to each other, but more importantly, to those who will suffer the brunt of, or the worst of this of climate change if we don't get it right, the future generation. So I mean that's me giving my parting shot for this session. And I think we have a very important thing to do to make sure that we'll have evidence that this panel happened. I think we're supposed to take a photo. So, yes. Okay, please hold your pose for, okay, on your cue.
Okay, did we already get that?
Well, I hope so. Did you get the photo?
If we can turn on our videos once again, so we can take one more photo. Okay, all right. Everyone is already on the spotlight. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So, if you have time, you can stay for the second session. But thank you very much to all our session 1 speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Commissioner Ratio, Kai.
Thank you all.
Okay, let's. All right, so Angelica, I pass it on to you for the second session.
All right, so right now we'll be proceeding to our second session. For the second session, from micro, we go micro. So our speakers will be highlighting their local experiences in accessing climate finance. We will also have another session with them. And with me right now is another co-moderator for the climate finance team, Jansen Martinez. if you can open up your cameras so the rest of the viewers can also see you. So Jansen will be co-moderating with us together with Francis. And joining us in the panel are Sir Melchor John Largo, Municipal Environment and Natural Resource Officer from the Local Government Unit of Lanuza, Surigao del Sur. Sir Victor Gerald Castañeda, Municipal Planning and Development Office of the Local Government Unit of Hirona Tarlac. Sir Jonathan Litang from the Provincial Planning Development Office of the Provincial Government of Surigao del Norte. And lastly, Ms. Rose Ruelo Abanto from Card Pioneer Microinsurance Incorporated. So I invite everyone first turn on their videos so all of us can see our session 2 speakers. Okay, to officially start the discussion, Francis, the floor is yours.
Yes. Well, again, thank you for to our speakers for making time. Yeah. So let's do some check-ins again. I think it's important that we do that, especially at this time. Can I call on our first speaker, Sir? Our speakers, Sir Melchor, Sir Gerald, and Sir Jonathan. Sige, check-in muna po tayo. Let's just do a round of check-in siguro para mamaya diretso na kayo sa presentation. So we've been in various states of lockdown for the past year. And if you've been monitoring our first session, we asked our guests, meron po ba kayong realization, meron ba kayong na-discover sa sarili nyo in the past year? Meron ba kayong bagong hobby o bagong libangan na natutunan? Just to start things off. So sige po, kung sino ang gustong maunang mag-share. No? We just want to know how you coped with the pandemic.
Hello po, Sir Francis. No, during the surge of COVID-19 cases, we at the Siargao Climate Field School, we realized that it is really important, no, to have the school prepared, as it is one of the enabling mechanisms of the local government unit. I myself, no, I am one of the frontliners since March last year, and then I stopped around August. So I was one of those frontliners. The Provincial Planning Office were among those offices who voluntarily helped both in crafting some initiatives, programs, and in visiting houses to understand more of their needs for us to match the strategies that we have implemented in the province. So COVID-19 is actually more easy if we will take that from the grassroots, no, what we have understand, and then we are going to match that of what we have planned.
Thank you, Sir Jonathan. Pwede niyong ipasa kung sino man ang gusto niyong from our panel of speakers.
I think we have the same experience with Lanosa, so I think Sir Gerald can also share that one, since both of us are also promoting livelihood component, no, for agri-related programs, for processing and vertical. Sir Gerald, I think you can also share with your experience.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jonathan. Jonathan. Well, mine is a very personal one. The pandemic has brought lots of things, but first of all, my family, the pandemic has brought us, my children together. Before they were all in Manila, and we rarely see each other. But when we had this lockdown, they all went back here in the province and are right now staying with us. It's tough, but it's good they're back, and like having them when they were kids. Luckily, we are healthy, and none of us have been affected by the COVID, and I'm very grateful for that. So, yun lang. Okay.
Thanks. Nawala si Sir John, baka nagre-reconnect pa. So si Rose, ikaw na muna.
Okay, thank you, Francis. No, thank you for asking. So, personally, I'm doing well. So, though it's not easy to cope with what happened now, no. So, but having our family with us and having the open mind to move forward. So, I think slowly everything will be okay. So, and siguro realization ko rin is during the lockdown, no, na magaling pala ako magluto. So that's one thing, that since yun nga, personally, 6 months ako na lockdown in Manila, and living alone is difficult. But as mentioned, if you are, your mind is open and having your family support, is everything will be okay.
Ayun, sakto ang balik ni Sir Melchor Largo. Melchor, Sir, kayo, ano po ang inyong nadiskubre o ang na-realize nyo sa panahon ng pandemic?
Good afternoon po. As a government employee, particularly in the local government unit, the lockdown of COVID, while most of the offices are staying at home, but me as member of the incident management team.
Ayun.
Okay. Sorry po.
Okay lang po, okay lang po.
Okay. So again, my personal experience with COVID, while we are not working with our routine in the office, but I'm quite busy attending the COVID-related functions as member of the incident management team. Generally, the municipality, the cases of COVID in the municipality is not quite high, but our family, sad to say that we lost one of the member of our family, the elder brother.
Siguro, mukhang nawala po si ang connection ni Sir Melchor. But we're very sorry to hear about your loss, no, dun sa COVID. And I think itong mga sitwasyon na ito, especially that we have 3 representatives of LGUs, no, na iba sa kanila nung magkaroon ng pandemic, they have to be in the yung sinasabi natin, in the thick of things, no? Kasi merong incident, yung kumbaga merong sistema, may humanitarian response system tayo na kailangan i-activate, no? At yun, I'm sure ay naka-apekto sa inyo pang ibang mga plano, no? Kasi mukhang wala namang nagplano talaga nitong pandemic. And that's what we would like to discuss, no? Paano ba ito naka-apekto? Paano ito pwedeng maka-apekto pa sa iba pa nating trabaho? Ano yung pwede natin gawin? No? More than paano tayo mag-a-adjust? And I pass on to Johnson to facilitate this discussion.
Okay, thank you, Francis. First of all, good afternoon to everyone in this event, and also to everyone who is watching through Facebook and other platforms. Unang-una, gusto kong malaman ng lahat na we are honored to have most of our speakers right now to be among the frontliners who dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic. Given na kasama kayo sa provincial or sa municipality LGU ninyo, malamang isa kayo sa mga pinakabugbog nitong 2020 events. And also we are very much glad to know that right now all of you are safe with your respective family members, and we wish you to be safe for the rest of the year. And now to continue with the discussions, I would like to ask our first 3 speakers who are apparently the representatives of the first batch of approved projects of the People's Survival Fund, or the PSF. Maybe you could share more. Maybe you could share something about your projects. What is it about? Who are the beneficiaries, and how did you conceptualize such projects? Maybe our representative from the municipality of Lanuza, Sir John. Baka okay lang sa inyo mauna. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you po. Before that, I would like to, some background, no? I would like to share with you the a brief information about the municipality of Lanuza. Lanuza is a third-class municipality comprising 30 barangays with a total land area of 39,000 plus, with a total population of more or less 12,600 residents. The municipality is both mountainous and coastal municipality, with 85% of its total area, land area, is timberland. The timberland area is occupied and cleared with the Certificate of Ancestral Domain Titles, or CADTIs, CAD-02, CAD-114, and CAD-115 of Manubo and Mamanwa tribes. LGU Leno has an ongoing project funded by the People's Survival Fund entitled Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Response as Coping Mechanism to Resiliency, with an approved project cost of 39,048,000 to cover 4 major components, namely watershed management, with an objective to have a well-managed community watersheds for domestic and irrigation purposes. The second component is ecosystem management. The objective is river and mangrove ecosystems protected and stabilized. The third component is forest cover improvement. The objective is forest cover improved through enrichment planting of endemic trees in ancestral domain protected areas. And the last one is the livelihood and capacity development. And the objective is creation of resilient livelihood adaptive to climate impacts. In terms of beneficiaries, the direct beneficiaries of the first 3 components are the 5 IP communities in the 3 CADTES and the end users of the domestic and irrigation water supply. For the livelihood component, the beneficiaries are the members of the Sitio April Winemakers Associations who are involved in IPA, sugar, and wine production. For the beneficiaries,
Mukhang nawala si Sir John.
that's the problem. Okay, yes.
Sir John, nandito pa rin ba kayo? Ayan, ayun na. Sir, i-off ko lang muna yung video ko. Baka kasi nahirapan sa bandwidth dahil sa video. So you may continue, sir. Patayin ko lang yung video. Thank you.
Okay, that is for the introduction, sir. It's all about for our project.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, po.
Yes, sir. We hear you. Okay.
Okay. Okay po, sir. Yung unang tanong po ay nasagot ko na.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So moving on to our next speaker, may we ask Mr. Gerald Castañeda to give an overview also of your project being implemented in the municipality of Gerona, Tarlac.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to present our approved PSF proposal. Our title is Promoting Resiliency in a Climate-Informed Gerona. So the project aims to contribute to simultaneous improvement in human, natural environment, social capital, and financial assets to improve Gerona's resiliency to climate change. And our first objective is expanding Gerona's climate information and warning services and resiliency program. Currently, Gerona has its own municipal weather and climate center, or what we call AgroMet, which was established in 2030. This was a locally funded project to help provide climate-based warning services for agriculture, and also to warn the public of incoming natural disasters such as typhoons and droughts. With the generation of climate data since 2013, the next phase would be to improve its functions and possibly use the same climate information to expand the warning services to health sector in partnership with the municipal health office. Our next objective is to improve LGU's disaster response capabilities. The project will support Uranus' effort to improve preparedness in health, social protection, and the disaster risk reduction functions. The project will ensure uninterrupted service even in times of disaster and better response equipment. And our last objective is to improve Hirona's forest cover, water use management, and biodiversity. So improving forest cover and overall biodiversity, including the farm, will improve temperatures and groundwater retention. This will also benefit and improve air quality and biodiversity in the area. Community managed nurseries will be established, so reforestation needs can already be sourced from these social enterprises. Seed selection will also be regular practice to try out, replicate new and emerging varieties that are climate appropriate and suited to soil condition of Verona. Verona will maintain its subsidy program for seeds and organic fertilizer. And together, this intervention will help improve natural assets of Verona to help in improving adaptive capacities and resiliencies of agriculture sector. Increased biodiversity will be a natural way to reduce pests and diseases. Water availability is a risk for Verona. Thus, this objection aims to reduce this risk from happening by promoting water maximization, water use, and management. Our total budget, which was approved, is 38.1 million. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sir Gerald. Now we move on to Mr. Jonathan Litang, formerly of the Surigao State College of Technology, which is the implementing partner of the PSF project of El Carmen, Siargao. Sir?
Thank you, Johnson. Johnson, Danica, and Kairos were not actually new to this project, because the three of them actually helped also during the crafting of the Siargao Climate Field School. For a start, the municipality of Del Carmen is a fifth-class municipality of the province of Surigao del Norte, particularly in Siargao Islands, which is known internationally as the surfing capital of the Philippines. The birth of the Siargao Climate Field School was done with the help of the Surigao State College of Technology and people's organizations such as CCAT, ICSC, and many others. The Siargao Climate Field School for Farmers and Fisher Folks is a one-stop climate adaptation initiative that is provided by the local government unit of Del Carmen in partnership with the Surigao State College of Technology and some key agencies and sectors to bring the government, academe, and NGOs initiative directly to the farmers and fisher folks, creating a climate-smart and resilient agri-fisheries community. The main components of the Siargao Climate Field School are learning resources, information and multiplier, establishment of host farms and nurseries, establishment of agromeat facility, and controlled environment and research facility, including the early detection of pests and other vector-borne diseases. Right now, while waiting for the completion of the building of the Siargao Climate Field School, the Surigao State College have managed to offer some trainings to the possible beneficiaries with the help of the local government units such as crop production, organic fertilizer, horticulture, swine production, poultry production, slaughtering operations, and bangos deboning. So those are the current initiatives of the proposed PSF project of Del Carmen.
Thank you, Sir Jonathan, and thank you, Sir Gerald and Sir John, for sharing a quick overview of your projects. So medyo nakita na natin na merong kahit paano merong similarities between the projects. So most likely livelihood programs, alternative livelihood programs, and some of them are nature-based solutions also. And some of the project components also utilize the use of climate information in informing decision makers on what to do in certain sectors such as agriculture. So Francis, I now give the floor to you for additional questions to our speakers.
Well, my question really is what Mr. Litang mentioned, the partnerships that they had with NGOs and academe. And I also know that in Herona, there's the implementing partners and NGO. So I would like to ask Sir Gerald, what do you think is the value of collaborating with NGOs in climate, adaptation projects?
Yes, Sir Francis, thank you for the question. First of all, I'd like to give the audience some mapping first Hirona, before I would answer that. No. Basically, Hirona lies at the heart of the Tarlac province and is commonly referred to as the melting pot of Central Luzon. So we are the only municipality in Luzon that have been granted by the where our PSF were approved. No, we are the next town after we are within the vicinity of Tarlac City. Tarlac City is our neighbor. It's about 14 kilometers in distance. No? Probably the most nearest airport is Clark Airport, which is around 50 kilometers. No? Hirona, Tarlac is so for the information of everyone, Hirona Tarlac is a type 1 climate area. No? So that means we have two pronounced seasons. The dry season, which covers December to May, and the wet season covers June to October. No? These two extreme patterns affects rice and other crop production in Hirona, which is primarily an agricultural community. No? Siyempre, during wet season, flooding events submerge standing crops underwater. So also during the dry season, extended dry spell and droughts usually result in little to no irrigation water. So with this scenario, we have been coming up on how to formulate or to have programs and projects that might answer these questions. It was timely in 2009, the Rice Watch Action Network, or R1 for short, have been asking us to help them develop such programs. So at that time, Rice Watch Action Network, together with us and Irusin, which is in Sorsogon, province of Sorsogon, piloted the two municipalities with the aim to increase awareness and capacitate farmers and communities in addressing climate change and help us to enhance our yields. In the process, achieve additional benefits such as preserving the environment and reducing health risks through use of organic fertilizer. So with that, from the climate field schools, which initially we piloted, it had come as a result. With Rice Watch, we were able to produce the climate resiliency field schools, which aim to with centers on climate change and sustainable agriculture. So with that, with the help also with the R1, we devised the climate information system. So in order to support the climate information, we should have available climate information data. The nearest one is in Manila, no, the weather station. No, Subic pala. Subic, which is in Zambales. No? So with that radius, the data might not, the data might not be very accurate. No? So we decided to put up our own weather station, which up till now is functioning. No? So with that, when we have put up that sometime in 2013, we also have a MO with the Pag-asa for the training of our personnel that maintains our agromet station. So our personnel gathers data from our weather instrument and send this data to Pag-asa daily. No? In return, Pag-asa send us back our 10-day forecast, which is posted in our weather boards in every barangay and in our Facebook account. No? Also, Pag-asa conducts regular climate forum with our farmers, for them to have a picture of the weather for the coming 6 months that will help them in the preparation of the first cropping. No? Also, in 2015, we were able to formulate our local climate change action with the help of R1, no? Wherein this was our guide and basis in identifying our priority programs and projects that were incorporated in our approved PSF. So basically, with that history, it's already history that we are the fastest LGU that was approved by the PSF. So we 2016, we submitted our proposal. In 2017, we were approved of our proposal. But from the 79 million, it was shelved to 38.1 million. So thank you.
Well, thank you. While I think the budget was reduced, I think what is important there is that there were things that needed to be done. And, even with a reduced budget, I think we were able to demonstrate that, if you have multi-stakeholders, LGU, expert agencies like the Pag-asa, NGOs, we can do something so as to increase the resilience of our communities. So I think that's what I would like to lift from that discussion.
Also, in addition to that, maybe through local financing, we showed the Climate Change Commission that we are ready to sustain the programs. No, that's very important that's the key element to show them or convince them that you are serious in your programs.
Thank you for mentioning that. Because I was about to ask you how did you cope with the reduction, and I think you just said it right away that there are funds that can be mobilized from the local government unit or at that local level to augment the funds that are coming in specifically for climate adaptation, and that really. As you have said, it demonstrates the seriousness of the LGU about taking these actions. And I think the more we take that position, that we can demonstrate our seriousness, not only by coming up with a proposal, but actually backing it up with our own resources. And I'm sure there were resources that cannot be quantified in pesos, people contributing their ideas, contributing their time so that you can come up with a good proposal. Over to you, Jansen.
Thanks, Francis. Thank you also to Sir Gerald for sharing Herona's case. It's nice to know that the LGU has its own initiative into supporting climate resiliency activities, and to also has its own initiative to engage local partners such as Rice Watch and Action Network, which focuses on agriculture. And now I have a question for Sir Jonathan Litang of Del Carmen, representing the Del Carmen project. Sir Jonathan, kasi usually ang academic institutions, they are being engaged when it comes to the research and development components. Pero ang narinig namin dito sa Del Carmen project, hindi lang research and development component, maski yung mismong pag-craft ng mismong proposal, yung significant portion of the proposal is planned to be implemented by the academic institution, which is SSCT, Surigao State College of Technology. So, pwede bang i-elaborate niyo, sir? Ano yung role ng SSCT into crafting the proposal, and also ano yung magiging role niya once ma-implement na yung project fully? Kasi nabanggit nyo kanina na ginagawa na yata yung building, no?
Yes. Johnson, actually, fortunately, no, the municipality of Del Carmen is implementing a convergence called PLANS, or the partnership between LGU, academe, and national government agencies and stakeholders. So it was easy, no, for the Surigao State College of Technology to help the LGU. As a matter of fact, before the implementation or before the crafting of the Siargao Climate Field School, the academe was already helping the LGU during the implementation of the Climate Adaptive Support Services of the Climate Change Commission, wherein the academe helped during the implementation and in documenting the best practices of the CAS, or the Climate Adaptive Support Services. So with the crafting of the proposal of the Siargao Climate Field School, this was first initiated by Mayor Alfredo Coro, and then he opened that one with the academe. So with the help of the BioSmart program, or the extension and research program of SSCT, the academe actually helped first in securing with those results from the Climate Adaptive Support Services, wherein they understand that there is a lack of knowledge on the type of lands fit for the type of soil on the beneficiaries farm. And they also have seen that there is an unforeseen climate and weather conditions. The academy also saw from the beneficiaries of CAS that there was lack of knowledge on livestock, food processing, and alternative livelihood, and also the lack of knowledge on addressing problems caused by changes in weather conditions. So from there, I myself, because I was still part of the academy at that time, we called some participants, no, from the people's organization and also with the LGU. We crafted the proposal, and the Siargao Climate Field School was being proposed for the PSF. At first, the Surigao State College was tasked to prepare the deed of use of rock, since there was no available laboratory for the Siargao Climate Field School. So it was the academe who offered that one to the local government unit. And then since the academe has is offering Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and BS Fisheries, so might as well, with the help of the BioSmart, we try to incorporate, we include in the planning to adapt or first we look back first on the best practices of CAS, and then we integrate that one on the proposed curriculum of the Siargao Climate Field School. So both the Siargao Climate Field School and the SSCT will enjoy the same curriculum as to understanding the weather conditions and many others, no. So we are going to meet halfway, no, with the programs that will be implemented with the Siargao Climate Field School, and also those programs of the BS Fisheries and BS Agriculture. And also it is also the academe, the Surigao State College of Technology, who looked into the equipment that will be needed by the Siargao Climate Field School, and we volunteer to be one of those consultants and lecturers during the implementation of the Siargao Climate Field School.
Thank you very much for sharing, Sir Jonathan. So, ang ganda nung ano na yun, yung acronym, yung PLANS. So, Partnership of LGU and Academic Institutions Network. Okay. Also, magandang backgrounder rin yun kasi even before PSF, ay meron na rin palang involvement ang Climate Change Commission with Siargao. And also, yes sir, may i-add po kayo.
Yes, actually, even if we are not yet on the implementation stage, no, with those proposed program, Surigao State College of Technology and LGU is actually implementing with the help of the Department of Trade and Industry, no. We availed some shared service facilities, such as those concentrating on cassava, mariculture, cocoa sugar, and bake shops. With the same concept, with the same beneficiaries. So the academy is actually starting, even if the Siargao Climate Field School has not yet started its implementation. Yan ang kagandahan pag pag-partner ang academy.
Oo nga sir, pati namin lahat ng technical expertise na kailangan. Mukhang nakukuha naman pala natin sa academe, no? Okay. I think
yes po.
Yes.
For those who are planning to propose their projects, no, with PSF, I encourage na take advantage of those services of the expertise of the academy, no, in your municipality, to make your proposal easier, and the implementation will be seamless.
Thank you, sir. I think your advice is duly noted by the audience. I think Angelica has a question to raise.
Yes, I have a question for Sir John. No, Sir John, hopefully you're still with us here in the call. It's okay po if you won't be able to turn on your video because of the bandwidth issue, but I just have a very short question since kanina na-discuss na nga nila yung even with Commissioner Herrera earlier na sabi na ng PSF ay isa sa mga unang climate finance, diba, dito nga sa Philippines. So, alam din natin na yung Lanuza ay isa sa mga LGUs na naging involved dun sa earlier stages or lobbying for the PSF, no? So, pwede nyo po bang ma-share din po sa amin kung ano po yung involvement nyo dito para mapasa din po yung PSF into law?
Okay po, ma'am. Thank you. To my knowledge, our former mayor, the late Salvacion Saloma Sarcon, was one of the LGU officials who lobbied and appeared before the legislative hearings in Congress as a resource person to support the process of people's survival. She had that great passion for the environment. In fact, her tenure for 3 consecutive terms as the local chief executive, she adopted the reach to ref approach as the thrust of her administration. That is why it is not new and it's no secret that secret both to the previous and present administrations that financial support from the national government and other cooperating agencies are needed for the LGU to implement adaptive measures to caution impact of climate change. Because LGU coffers alone, as we all know, are very limited and basically not enough. Since our mayor was one of the lobbyists for the passage of the PSF into law, she was known to the circle of NGO friends, both at the local and in the national level. In the middle of 2015, the call for budget proposal for PSF was known to us. Luckily, with the help accorded to us by our friends in the NGO community, particularly Oxfam Philippines and Paglilingkod Batas Pangkapatiran Foundation, its local partner, and some other partners, LGU was able to meet the deadline of the submission of the project proposal. and was considered to be one of the pilot areas of the People Survival Fund funded project. So that's how we get our project.
Yeah. Thank you, Sir John, 'no. Talagang makikita natin dito din yung importance nung governance mismo sa LGU, nung ating mga leaders to push through for this kind of initiatives. And of course, sinabi niyo din kanina, nandun nga din yung stakeholder engagement na ang dami niyo ding naging katrabaho para mabuo 'to. I think evident sa lahat ng mga naging sagot ng iba't ibang speakers na importante talaga yung stakeholder cooperation for us to push these initiatives from the local level. So thank you, Sir John. Babalikan po namin ulit kayo para sa iba pong tanong. For now, we proceed to our next question. So Francis.
Yeah. Well, before I ask our speakers, before I throw the next question, there's a Q&A in our chat box. If it's possible for us to communicate in English. Well, apologies, but what we will do is that this session is being recorded. After this, we will send out a recording with subtitles for colleagues who are not able to understand Filipino. But for now, we felt that it's important that we use the language where we'll have a more more contextual discussion on the topic at hand, which is climate adaptation and resilience. And how it's experienced at the local level. So apologies for that, but the plan is that we send out a recording with English subtitles so that it will be accessible also to our colleagues who don't speak or understand Filipino. And thank you for your understanding. Let me throw the next question. I mean, you've all received, our colleagues from Herona, Del Carmen, and Lanuza have received funds from the PSF. And I'm just wondering, since from approval of the PSF proposal up to now, I would like to invite you to think of, the most important challenges that you have faced. And if you can share with us how you address those or maybe some of the lessons that you've gathered while addressing those big challenges. And I know that you have a long list, but maybe just pick one, like the one with the highest priority or the most important challenge that you have faced and hopefully surpassed since from the approval of your PSF proposal to the present. So it's okay. I know it's a big question, so you can take your time. And I don't want to call you as if in a recitation, but yeah, just please just turn on your mic when you're ready to share your views. Thanks.
Hello. Good afternoon, Pastor Francis.
Yes.
I'd like to start.
Sige. Okay, thanks.
Anyway, since most of our programs relies on the organizing farmers into community resilient field schools, we were affected by the COVID. Last time we have already organized 15 CRFS, but thinking after a year, we have to again get back to them. So when you get back to them, you have to help to know their situation. And like before, we organize them based on the needs for climate information. But now there are some problems ahead, basically livelihood. Aside from the COVID pandemic, we are also faced with the problems with the hogs, the pandemic on hogs.
ASF, African
ASF.
swine flu.
Yes, the ASF. No, since most of our farmers have also backyard piggeries. No, so that's the main obstacle we are facing right now. No, we are not back to zero. Think we have to reach out again to them and try to convince them with our program. So that's the thing we are facing right now.
Thank you. Well, before we move to Sir Melchor and Sir Jonathan, I mean, this is something that we also experienced when we were working in Bulacan. You know, like they were saying, like it was very difficult for us to continue the discussions about building up resilience to climate challenges because they were faced with. I mean, they agree it's very important for us. It's important work, but they're faced with very urgent work, which is to survive the COVID pandemic while recovering from the African swine flu uh, problem. So it was really compounding. You know, we already have problems with, we are challenged by climate change. And then you have another layer, the African swine flu. And then you have the COVID pandemic. So yeah, so it was also happening in our work when we were working in Bulacan. How about Sir Melchor or Sir Jonathan? What are your biggest challenges and how did you surpass it? And maybe share with us some of the lessons.
Again, I would like to emphasize that the municipality of Llanos is both mountainous and coastal municipality. And 85% of its total land area are timberland. And the municipality of Llanosa was then the host of several TLA concessioners, timber license agreements concessioners. So when the TLA expired, the tenure transferred to the IP communities, the indigenous peoples. That is why almost entirely of the 85% total land area of Llanosa, the timberland areas are occupied by the indigenous peoples, the two tribes of Manubu and Mamanwa. Now, by the time the TLA was still operational, these IPs are the laborers. When the TLA expired and the ownership transferred to the IPs, what they are in their minds, why not? They will not. Why not?
Did we just lose Sir John again? Okay. Well, while waiting for Sir John to come back, Sir Jonathan, kayo, ano naman ang inyong challenge? I think Sir John was relating yung mga issues about TLAs, timber licensing agreements now moving to being transferred to indigenous peoples groups. And really, those are some of the policy issues around the climate policy that we are faced with. And I think in their case, it's just it's a big issue because of a big part of their area is covered by timberland and covered by these policies. Sir John, are you back? Pwede pong, turn off nyo muna po yung cam.
Okay po. May I add, sir, no? Because of that, timber poaching is very prevalent in our forest lands. So with these climate events, our experience such as drought, flooding, and rain-induced landslide inspired the municipality.
Hi,
hello. Hello, sir.
Yes, sir. We can hear you, but baka po pwedeng i-off nyo na lang yung video so that ma-maximize natin yung bandwidth.
Okay po, sir. Okay. May I continue? So with all those experiences, the drought, the flooding, and rain-induced landslide inspired us to be aggressive for climate change adaptive measures. Our persistent campaign in the communities, especially the natural resource dependent and the indigenous people communities, on the importance of a well-managed environment against the disastrous effect brought by natural events, help them to understand the bigger role the community has to from being resource users to be good resource managers. Thus, nowadays, community receptiveness to environmental program is getting better, but still support mechanism. So our lesson is this: working hand in hand with entrepreneurs and indigenous peoples is very essential in combating the impact of climate change. Very essential in the sense that they are the primary stakeholders in the forest, and what they do will always have an impact to the environment. The symbiotic effect might be good or bad. For instance, if the farming practices are not environment friendly, they are the first to suffer the consequences and also the negative impact.
Problematic yata talaga yung ating connection sa kay Sir John. Sir Jonathan, kayo po, ano pong inyong natutunan since you have implemented this?
Sir Francis, I think Sir Melchor is still talking.
Okay. Sorry po. Nawawala kasi.
Sorry po. Talaga itong ano eh.
Okay lang po.
Again, for instance, if the farming practices are not environment friendly, they're first to suffer the consequences, and also the negative impact will redound to the lowland areas. Likewise, when the practices are good, the whole community will enjoy the benefits. That is why in every program, project, or activity to be implemented in the community, the community leaders and members shall be considered part of the whole process of the project cycle to ensure success and sustainability. Now, how these natural events affected our PSF project implementation, sa People Survival Fund project implementation. Knowing the nature of our project, which is sequential, which means we can only implement other activities once the first activity is completed, and the mode of releases of funds, that is by tranches, the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly affected our timeline of implementation. For instance, the community lockdown, where movement of people and service delivery are very much limited only to essential services, which lead to the delay of procurement of services and goods needed by the project. There were no takers sa aming mga pinopost na mga items sa PLGIPs. So we import unproductive time for the reposting, even to the point of resorting to alternative mode of procurement. After two field biddings as provided in Republic Act 19184, otherwise known as the Government Procurement Reform Act. While we are optimistic that we can implement the project deliverables in due time, our worries are more on how to sustain the eagerness and the momentum of trust from the stakeholders, given the untimely delay of project implementation. Knowing that before the project officially takes off, we presented and discussed with the National Commissions on Indigenous People, NCIP Provincial Office, Tribal Council of different tribal communities, and the other project stakeholders, the details of the project to include the timeline, the project and budget, and how the project can help meet the dreams and aspirations of the tribal communities by putting into function or the materialization of the program project and activities as embodied in the respective ancestral sustainable development and protection plan, or HDPP. Actually, it was a long battle and hard-fought victory on our part that we were able to convince the IP communities to accept the project. We are happy to inform that the municipality of Llanosa is really following the guidelines. Hello po. Okay. Can I continue, sir? Hello.
Sige po, sir. Uh, doon po sa lahat ng nabanggit nyo, alin yung pinakamabigat na na challenge that you have faced na medyo nasimulan nyo ng i-address? I mean, if there's one thing that you will pick out as the biggest challenge.
Ganito, sir. Well, while we have the funds to finance the project, but we cannot implement the project without securing the free prior informed consent from the IP communities.
Okay.
In the entire Caraga, maybe Llanusa is the first LGU implementing project following the guidelines of the free prior informed consent. So it is the People Survival Plan project that pushed the municipality. Maybe this is an eye-opener for other LGUs implementing projects in ancestral domain, that you have to follow the processes of securing the free prior informed consent, which is a long battle because in our experience here, we have to present the very details of the project, the purpose, the component, how much it costs, the budget, and the timetable. So, well, we were able to get the consent of the 5 communities, but the top IP communities did not accept the project by issuing the resolution that they don't want the project. So, anyway,
thank you, sir. Thanks, sir. I think that's a very that's something that we have to keep in mind. Kasi again, if you think of yung mga areas na exposed to climate change impacts, marami dyan ay yung mga may mga areas na nandoon yung covered siya ng ancestral domain at hindi common climate change yung project natin, hindi na tayo susunod dun sa sinasabi ng batas na katulad ng IPRA. So yung free prior informed consent is it's very important, no? So hindi lang po ito, no? I mean, I think what it demonstrates, well, at least to me, is that yung ating climate adaptation is not just infrastructure or technology or yung climate forecasting. Yung isang malaking parte na is community engagement, and in the case of in cases where you have communities with indigenous peoples, then we have to follow the law. And really, tingin ko naman pagka nakuha natin, sabihin, nagawa natin yung dapat natin gawin, sila rin naman yung makikinabang nun. In fact, they play a big role, no? Lalo na sa forestry. Di po ba? Kasi sila yung masanay dyan at nakita naman na natin yan sa ibang projects, how communities can actually play a key role in nature-based solution. So thank you, Sir John. And well, unfortunately, medyo choppy yung ating signal. But I'd like to pass it on to Sir Jonathan. One challenge that you have, you can share with us yung konting lessons, how you adjust that. Thank you.
Yes, actually, I agree with the two speakers, no? That while it is true that the People Survival Fund financing is indeed a big help, still we must still find ways, no, to finance the project, especially with the financing gaps. However, even before COVID-19, our biggest problem is the construction of the building, as all other components are dependent on it. There was actually a delay during the implementation. There are lots of changes that occurred since the costings were done 3 years before the fund was given or downloaded to Del Carmen. There was a need to redesign the building at a certain point, but still it has with the same quality and acceptability. And the LGU has to dole out from its fund as their counterpart. Siargao is a separate island from the mainland of the province. Thus, it entails more costings to transport the construction materials from the mainland to Siargao. And during the COVID-19, it becomes harder. However, the LGU were able to make some strategies to hasten the process. We took the lockdowns to complete the building component to at least finish the total component by 97%. Some programs were being intensified and were played as based on the timetable. Actually, we took the COVID-19 as what we call this, as an opportunity, no? So during the advent of COVID-19, we find it as one of our opportunities. Since the Siargao Climate Field School is implementing an on-air lecture, so it was like a trial and error on what it looks like. So the lecturers of the Siargao Climate Field School bring the programs, we try the programs on air through the Radio Kabakawan, and then we discuss on how to address food security and the usage of climatological data. We gain really lots of opportunities, no? Actually, in the advent of COVID-19, the local government unit was able to implement, no? Was able to have another partnership with the academy. We proposed projects with DNR and ADB. We gained ongoing assessment. No, we both conducted a water, both for runoff and groundwater, which is still applicable to the beneficiaries of the Climate Field School. Fortunately, no, since during the process of crafting the proposal for the Climate Field School was done with the consultations from the grassroots, and it is an output of the working stakeholders, and it is being derived from the local climate change action plan. So we find the connection, no? The provincial government of Surigao del Norte can actually enter to the program of the municipal government and for the implementation of the Siargao Climate Field School. So we were able to connect the strategies that is connected, no, with the implementation that is still aligned with objectives of the Climate Field School, such as those programs that we answer climate drought, no. So the province was able to find a way. We partnered with DOT for their sustainable, inclusive, and resilient tourism, for the upgrading of water supply and wastewater treatment, which may directly or indirectly help the Siargao Climate Field School address those objectives while still we are waiting for the completion of the building. So we completed those components, no, that should have been done a year ago, no. So we were able to take that opportunity, no, during the advent of COVID-19. And currently, the Siargao Climate Field School is assessing those results from those partnerships that we have gained from last year, no, to the present, so that we may be able to use those to enhance the curriculum that we have proposed in 2015, so that those curriculums are still relevant, no. If you are going to implement that one, maybe the end of 2021, and also not just relevant but also significant, and those findings that we came across during the advent of COVID-19 are still applicable. We are going to adapt those best practices from the past and with the current, no. So we find it an opportunity to study, to, you know, the academy is able to maximize the time for the preparation of the operation manual, for financing mechanisms, for preparation of the area, for the selection of the beneficiaries, and many others, no, including those training needs that would be significant still. So we were able to retool some of the programs that we have proposed in 2015 and in the advent of COVID-19. So we are really not in a loss, no, during the pandemic. We find the opportunity, we find ways, and we never stop, no, just because there is a pandemic. I think that is all.
Thank you, sir. I think ibang challenge yun. No? Ibig sabihin yung, ang challenge nyo was you had programs on train, tapos may dumating yung pandemic. But then, some of those, ang maganda lang, some of the interventions ninyo sa climate ay nagamit din natin para dun sa interventions nyo sa COVID. No? So, I think, well, I just want to say na meron din parang ganyan dun sa ibang experiences namin. And I think it only shows that building up resilience to climate risks can actually help us build resilience overall. Not only, hindi siya specific, yung resilience kasi hindi siya specific sa isang risk lang. Although sa climate, meron kang hinahanap din na special, but generally building up resilience, especially increasing the capacity of our citizens to adjust. Di ba kasi isang bahagi ng resilience building I mean, meron siyang knock-on effects or yung sinasabi nating co-benefits. So thank you for that sharing this ating tatlong LGU representatives. And I'll pass it on to our co-moderators.
Thank you, Francis. Magandang point yung pinakita ng ating three speakers, no? Kasi sino bang makakapag-expect ng pandemic na mangyari before even the actual implementation of our project. So maganda rin yung examples nila on how they did adapt to the current situation, kumbaga yung tinatawag nating new normal. And it shows na our people on the ground, especially the ones in the municipalities or provinces, hindi naman sila, kahit may balakid, hindi naman basta-basta titigil lang ang operations. Sa examples ni Sir John, ni Sir Jonathan, and ni Sir Gerald, gumawa naman sila ng paraan on their end. Despite the fact na nagkaroon ng problema sa implementation at the national level dahil yun nga, restrictions at iba pang mga backlogs, hindi naman natapos talaga yung engagement nila with their expected beneficiaries. Now, similar to session 1, magkakaroon din tayo ng discussion on CDR-FI at the local level, and I would like to give the floor to my colleague Angelica.
Thank you, Jansen, and thank you to all the speakers, representatives from our LGU. So now we'll proceed to the second part of the session 2. Now we have Ma'am Rose Abanto to discuss more on the local CDR-FI. Because as you can see earlier, si Victoria mas nag-focus siya sa international setting, and we have now a more local context na pwedeng i-provide sa atin ni Ma'am Rose. And with all of the developments, Ma'am Rose, ngayong may pandemic, and syempre mas naging complex na yung risk ngayong may pandemic, tapos meron pang, di ba, meron ding ongoing climate change crisis. So ano po yung mga promising modalities or frameworks for different financing mechanisms at different levels? So might be micro or macro level.
Okay, good afternoon sa lahat ulit. So thank you so much, Angelica. So just last year, we developed a business interruption insurance product for micro, small and medium enterprises. So this aims to promote MSMEs, owners to have a personal accident benefit, fire benefit, and loss of income benefit due to business interruption caused by natural disasters such as typhoon, floods, and earthquakes. So we hope to roll this out soon as we get the approval from the Insurance Commission. And also we are enhancing our crop insurance product. So currently this only offers or covers typhoon and flood perils for rice and corn. So limited nga lang siya for rice and corn for now. And we hope to add drought coverage and introduce the use of soil moist index insurance. So this way, we will be able to reduce administration, operational costs, and process claims more efficiently. For as of now, we are using indemnity in processing the claims. So if you are familiar with indemnity, sobrang tedious and risk din sa part with sa aming employees to go down and process claims, no. So having this exploration, though it's not planchado pa, this is still a work in progress, and we are hopeful to launch this within the year. And then we also explore aside rice and corn, we are exploring or covering more crops such as coconut, cacao, pineapple, banana, coffee, and sugarcane. So by adding these crops, we can expand our offerings, no, Angelica? So we have this initial discussion with PCIC. So ito naman is public and private partnership with the help of ADB and having PCIC in the co-creation as they are more familiar in offering crop insurance. So we have the expertise. So having this expertise, kami namang mga private insurer is to learn more, no, and we can offer better and more relevant product design.
So very promising na ma'am yung nabanggit yung mga developments when it comes to new mechanisms and partnerships with other institutions. And nakikita namin na although parang this pandemic brought about these changes, relevant changes in the current mechanisms that we have, especially that you mentioned na yun nga yung accompanying risk with the current setup. So it's really good to know that although it's still a work in progress, it's still progress. Now we have these new modalities in the coming year. So hopefully ma'am, ito makita natin na yung sinasabi niyong pwede niyong ma-launch within the year ay hopefully matuloy nga po this year, lalo na yung pag-expand ng mga insurance to different crops. But to follow up din po ma'am siguro, meron pa po ba kayong ibang na-identify na sectors aside from agri, meron po ba kayong on marine, coastal, para po sa development din po ng mga products na to?
Okay, for now, we are seeing individual household or MSMEs and agri as the priority sector in product development. So on average, the country experiences 20 storms and typhoons per year. And seemingly, even those areas that hardly hit by typhoon before, getting affected now. So kung dati, it's more of Luzon, Samar. So lately, diba, last year, even Mindanao are no longer exempted. So these calamities devastate lives and livelihoods. So that is why we created a product covering damage to house structures brought about by typhoons and floods for individual households. So the microinsurance market is heavily involved in MSMEs and agriculture as source of livelihood. So majority of our clients, yung source of income nila is small businesses and agriculture. So we aim to get them covered for losses brought about by this calamity so they can bounce back fast. So we are not talking here millions, Angelica, small amount, pero small amount that can help them bounce back fast. So maka-rebuild man lang ng bahay nila agad-agad at pati rin yung buhay nila.
So far po na parang ang nakikita po talaga natin, ang focus po muna natin ngayon ay MSMEs and the agri sector, but hopefully in the future as we see pag mas okay na yung mga modalities, we can also cover different sectors aside from these two. And in relation din naman po dun sa mga parang shinare po sa atin ng mga government representatives natin kanina, nabanggit po nila yung mga climate strategies nila. Sa tingin niyo po, ano po ba sa perspective niyo, ano po pa yung value added ng patuloy na engagement or if limited man po yung engagement with our local governments for you and the rest of the private sector to develop and integrate CDRFI mechanisms in their short and long-term development plans?
Yeah, so kanina no very informative yung topic with our three representatives. So having LGUs as part of the equation and involving them in product and approach exploration may be the key to come up with a product na relevant to our target users, since we believe sa co-creation. And this is because yung LGU natin, they are more familiar kung ano yung mga specific needs of their area. So through this, we can gather data as granular as per barangay. The more granular the data is, the better it will help us design a product that is not only relevant but also sustainable.
So ma'am, no, pwede din natin tong parang pwede din natin tong ma-relate doon sa sinasabi din ni Victoria kanina nung first session, kung parang ma-unlock natin yung yung different mechanisms, yung access. Parang very important talaga yung data coming from the local level. So do you see po na parang in the future there will be a lot of engagements from the local government units to develop these kinds of initiatives?
Hopefully, Angelica, no, mas marami kasi nga knowing that the LGUs, they have the data, so they're more familiar with their constituents. So in that, it's easy for us to formulate or to create a product for the target users.
Okay, ma'am. So, yung isa ko pa ding tanong, no, siguro ito mas related din ito sa current policy developments. Kasi nabanggit nyo kanina, parang ang dami nyo ding dine-develop together with different institutions. These are new developments. So, from your side, from the private sector side, or if you have any other experience, so what data, policy, and institutional support are needed to make local CDRFI mechanisms more comprehensive to cover the risk of impacts of climate change and more accessible and affordable to the target beneficiaries at most risk to these impacts. Kasi parang ito, ma'am, parang yung focus na yun sa mga challenges nyo sa pagde-develop din ng mga policies.
Okay, so in terms of data, we need sample population profile, yung population profile that includes livelihood, housing structures, source of income, average income, very important yan. Data about the calamities that struck the areas and its impact. So, yan. So, and for the technical support, exploring coverages for livestock, fisheries, and vulnerable crops will also be helpful because just last year and even this year, we have plenty of partners who are asking if we could cover livestock fisheries, no? So, but having a good data will help us develop sustainable product to the target user. And most importantly, sa pag-develop ng product, to price the product right, to make it more sustainable. And most of all, support in making it available to the remote areas. So, two of the many things we have learned through the years, ako medyo matagal na sa microinsurance, no? And microinsurance that we need to invest people's awareness. So dapat aware sila kung ano yung product na pwede nilang ma-avail. And secondly, so alam nila where to buy the product, no? So accessible to them.
Okay po. As for the institutional support lang, ma'am, no, from maybe from the government and different institutions, parang who do you see as the most relevant stakeholders din? Kasi na-mention nyo naman na po kanina na yung important talaga yung on the ground din, coming from the ground. How about po sa national level?
Well, sa national level naman is yun, since yun nga yung awareness is magdidictate coming from them, no? So, like nung we started microinsurance and very supportive ang Department of Finance in educating microinsurance to the ground. So, I think they can help us with that.
Okay. So that's very, very clear. Coming from your answers nga po, ma'am, makikita natin na although there are a lot of ongoing developments, meron pa ding challenges in mainstreaming CDRFI in the Philippines. So we look forward to all of these developments in the future. And I think your sharing really complemented what Victoria shared. Parang aligned yung mga sagot nyo dun sa mga questions na prepare. So I think nakikita natin yung similarities talaga comparing to the other countries din na somehow meron ding similarities when it comes to the challenges in mainstreaming CDRFI. So thank you very much, Ma'am Rose, for that comprehensive presentation with us. So for now, for the speakers, no, we have some questions in the chat box. So in the interest of time, if you can also just put your answers in the chat box because we don't have time to answer them live. But if you have any questions to our speakers, you can always share them and share it with us in ICSC, and then we'll forward them to our speakers. So may I request everyone to turn on their videos. So lahat po ng ating mga speakers para din po sa ating key takeaway session. So nakita niyo naman po sa first session po na meron tayong portion doon na nanghingi po tayo ng key takeaways din sa ating sa ating mga speakers. So siguro mag-start po muna ako sa mga LGU representatives natin. Sir Gerald.
Okay, thank you. Take away. For me, the key in achieving a climate resiliency community is identifying our priority programs and projects. Kasi we are, on my side, I'm on the planning sectors. And by having a comprehensive plan which is participatory in nature, such as the Local Climate Change Action Plan, and allocating our available resources for that purpose. Furthermore, partnering with other organizations, whether from the government sector or private sector, to achieve our goal can be easily done if we have a plan. So that's it. Thank you.
Next would be Sir Jonathan from Surigao del Norte.
In proposing of your climate-related theme project, we shall never forget to revisit the provincial directions, the provincial and municipal development plans and recommendations of the different development sectors in order for us to come up with a proposal that will be that will give better impact to the community. We do not just plan ahead, but we plan as one with the community. And on behalf of the Siargao Climate Field School and of the province of Surigao del Norte, Salamat Karaja, People Survival Fund, and ICSC.
And if Sir John is here still with us, all right, Sir John.
My thanks to ICSC for inviting us to be part of this event. Always is for LGUs implementing ecosystem adaptation measures to address climate change impact in IB communities. No, you have to be conversant with the processes of securing the informed consent. No, and then establish a group of friends and green community, academic and national government that would in any way and accessing funds and preparation of proposals. And then in the implementation of the project, it should be transparent, you know, especially dealing with IT communities. And then advocate for alliance approach in implementing climate change projects, because at our end, we are thinking to share our experience with the member municipalities of the Llanos Development Alliance to implement or to replicate the same project, because by doing that, the greater effort may result to greater benefits of the community.
Thank you to our LGU representatives. And now for our last speaker, but definitely not the least, Ma'am Rose, your key takeaway po.
Thank you, Angelica. So I have two things. So first is data is vital and relevant in developing a product. Second is no matter how sexy and appealing a product we develop, but if the target user lacks awareness and it's not accessible to them, the product will be useless and our effort will be wasted.
Napakagandang key takeaway po niyan, ma'am. Sakto, very direct yung message niyo. So, I'll give the floor to my co-moderators, Jansen and Francis, for their to wrap up and maybe provide some key takeaways as well.
First of all, I would like to thank our speakers who are the representatives of the PSF projects, Sir John, Sir Gerald, and Sir Jonathan. I would like to thank you for sharing your insights, especially the importance of having a multi-stakeholder platform in implementing and coming up with climate change adaptation initiatives. So importante yung LGU, importante yung academe, importante rin yung local organization para sa isang successful formulation ng proposal and successful establishment ng isang climate rational. And to Ma'am Rose, I would like to thank you for emphasizing the importance of the somehow the attractiveness of products para ma-consume, para mahikayat yung mga possible consumers natin ng CDRFI product. Thank you. Francis?
Well, thank you for our LGU representatives at Kay Rose. I'm just circling back to a question. Well, a discussion that was started in session 1, and this talks about a proposed strategy, the Disaster Risk and Finance Initiative, na the development DOF ng 2015. Baka kailangan i-update at gawin natin na related sa climate and disaster. And this is about, it's talking about how LGUs can transfer some of the risk. Sabihin, ang nangyayari kasi, ini-internalize ng mga LGUs and even the national government agencies ang mga risks from the different disasters, including climate disasters. And maybe this is the time, now that we have, yung mga usapan niya namin, diba? Sabi ni Grant kanina, we have the science, including the mathematics. No? I think Rose mentioned yung weather index-based insurance. Ibig sabihin, kaya na nating i-measure yun. At kaya na natin i-compute kung paano natin poprotektahan ang ating mga assets, no? Yung ating communities at yung productive assets by way of sharing the load. Hindi kailangan kargahin ng magsasaka o ng community yung pag-aalala tungkol sa disaster. Hindi rin po pwedeng LGU lang kasi meron namang ibang mechanisms. Merong mechanisms ang estado, may mechanisms din ang merkado. Pero kailangan nating pag-aralan lahat yan so that we can appreciate what the possibilities are sa ganitong mga mekanismo. And I think this is acutely urgent, no? So doble na 'yon, no? Acute na, urgent pa for climate impacts kasi as we have seen, hindi kahit na dumating yung COVID, hindi naman nawala yung climate crisis. Ibig sabihin, we're just distracted in the last year about COVID. But really, the climate crisis didn't go away. So, I think yun ang yun ang ating, well, at least yun ang aking takeaway sa usapan na ito. And I think we can move to a very important part of this program, which is the picture taking. Direct.
Okay, if we can request everyone to open their videos and everyone to be put in the spotlight para po ma-capture natin ang ating mga speakers. Okay, are we complete? Okay, are we on the spotlight? So, okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Do we need one more? Okay, one more po. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay po. So, for now, thank you to our speakers. Thank you for sharing your time and for staying until the end of the program. So, as our discussion today comes to an end, it's of great pleasure to introduce the head of the climate governance team of ICSC to give the closing remarks. So, Sir Rex, the floor is yours.
Maraming salamat, Laika. To everyone who joined us from the ranks of those in the local and national government, from those of our partners both on the ground and abroad, from those who joined us in the previous episodes, till now for the concluding episode, and to our resource persons today, good day to all of you. Let me just single out Mr. John Largo. We condole with you regarding your loss. No? It's always a difficult situation to find ourselves in. But I have the unenviable task of concluding not only this episode, the third episode, but the entire webinar series. If it were only possible, I'm sure we would want to keep this conversation going even in the succeeding months, in time for the 26th Conference of Parties in Glasgow. After all, our intent is for these webinars to serve not only as our humble contribution to the Climate Adaptation Summit 2021, hosted by the Netherlands Embassy, but that this also serves as a lead up to COP26. Through this webinar series, aptly called Climate Change and COVID-19, Adapting to Two New Normals, we highlighted key actors in the critical discourse of climate adaptation and the challenges we continue to face in light of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. We deemed it appropriate to look back at what we've covered to remind ourselves of the plots as well as the twists, if you will, of what the series is all about. So with everyone's indulgence, allow me to just quickly narrate the summaries for each. In episode 1, we set the scene highlighting how local climate action thrived during, and more importantly, despite the pandemic, in Coron, Mandaue City, and Giwan. That this wasn't happenstance and is instead a foundation of resilience built into the key institutions by key stakeholders' knowledge, capacities, and beliefs in their sound and effective implementation and continuity. Thriving, not only surviving, by mobilizing accessible resources amid the backdrop of what may befall them based on sound scientific evidence. The same information that continued to equip local government partners for cooperation allowed them to set aside siloed approaches to development and played a critical role for integrating science in development mechanisms. Resilience that was a lived experience for the speakers. That meant that the pandemic was but another occasion to bring about tools that they can use appropriate to the unique circumstances. In the second episode, the stage was set for experts from various disciplines to cover the gamut of climate change, from carbon offset strategies with other countries to regional cooperation for downscaling data at the barangay level and mobilizing more minds to respond to the call for scientific climate action. Hence, the emerging narrative on more urgently grounding science and translating realities in the indicators of human development, from food, livelihood, and health security. Studies that are practical, not off the shelf, participatory in approach, recognizing the complexity of climate change impacts. And in this afternoon's episode, the highlights clearly were that climate finance based on clear needs is that it's vital to safeguard climate actions in keeping with the momentum for country development pathways despite differing views and critical challenges. That it is a means not only for implementation, but more so in having the right framework to increase resilience, building knowledge and capacity for policies and plans grounded on science with safeguards, minimizing risks, increasing access, and serving as an objective measure of effective transfer of resources from industrial to vulnerable countries under the principle of equity. Local governments, through improving development planning, tracking climate-related expenditures, enable them to continue mobilizing resources anchored on the need to adapt. And to support their effort, ratcheting up ambition must take place at the national and international levels. Local implementation using climate information and nature-based solutions, among others, then become a means to assess how the targets for mitigation and adaptation are being met. As the speakers told us, we have never been short on scientific and indigenous knowledge useful in practical interventions for mitigation and adaptation. Indeed, the ground is fertile for more potential contributions from local experiences that we can elevate to the regional and international arena of climate action. We need to bridge the gap between science on the one hand and political and economic governance on the other, if we want to address the issue of climate change through coordination and support not only at the local or national level, but across all platforms to mobilize the right minds, resources, and mechanisms. From what were covered throughout, putting my hat on climate governance, the key drivers for policy development and implementation involve locally or regionally driven multi-actor coordination or collaboration, coupled with key institutional support at the high level of engagement with an effective resource mobilization using development funds anchored on sound science and evidence for climate action. Gaps still occur in mainstreaming, institutional support, and coordination. But then this may be expected. Nonetheless, the urgency behooves us to get better. The pandemic has caused meager resources to compete with climate change, even as resources for climate change alone already is not at the scale needed. As well, the pandemic's akin to climate change fast-forwarded. For the pandemic, we've counted lives and livelihoods affected or lost in a year. For climate change, we've measured this in decades. Compared to COVID-19, because climate change has been a longer scourge, in fact, climate complexity still presents so many challenges that confound, unraveling slowly, no less deadly, albeit more dramatically. So the opportunities for us abound, as Commissioner Herrera herself mentioned, to have all hands on deck for the work we need to put in, not to count losses, but to make our efforts actually count. Thus, while each of the webinar episodes can stand alone and are replete with their own conflicts, resolutions, challenges, valuable lessons, and the ways forward, together, more importantly, if we weave the episodes together, they create a more holistic appreciation of what we're facing. If we step back and reflect on the experiences told through the stories and the knowledge already there, but have to be consistently applied, these are not only those of the speakers alone. These are actually ours, everyone's. The protagonists may be embodied by speakers from the local and the national government, by experts and practitioners, not only in the country, but also abroad. But it is that we are the real protagonists in the story. Indeed, we are the ones who are adapting to the two new normals. And we try to find what resonates and reverberates for each of us as we navigate the pressing work on climate, while drawing on what the pandemic has shown us to be critical considerations for a green recovery, hopefully earlier rather than later. At this point, on behalf of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, let me express our gratitude to all the resource persons for each of the 3 episodes, experts in the various fields and representatives of the local governments. Your generosity of spirit enrich us. To our partner in this webinar series for your continuing support, to Ambassador Saskia Delang, and to Peter Terpstra and our other colleagues at the Embassy of Netherlands, much obliged. Let's do this again, but not necessarily soon. To all of the members of our audience throughout, may we have more opportunities to engage with you, not only through meetings online, but in a better future where we will be in front of each other. We hope you truly found it worth your while to have spent the 26th of January, February, and March with us. On behalf of my colleagues in the climate governance team, Danica Subnet, Elaine Lopez, the climate finance team, Kai de la Cruz, Jansen Martinez, and Laika David, Ira Guerrero, Joe Manalo, Denise Fontanilla, and AC De Matatak from the communications team, the entire administration and finance team. Special mention to Francis de la Cruz, has also been a constant presence in all of the episodes. All our other teammates from ICSC, wherever you are, from ICSC, we bid you farewell for now. Please stay safe. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Rex, for summarizing the webinar series, the Climate Change and COVID-19 Adapting to Two New Normals webinar series. We've picked up all the learnings, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions left unanswered, and we will make sure that we will forward them to our speakers. And thank you again to all who joined us this afternoon for the final webinar series of the 2020 Climate Adaptation Summit. Stay tuned for updates on the social media accounts of ICSC. That's from Facebook, Twitter, and of course, the social media accounts of the Netherlands Embassy. You may also visit the official platform to learn more about our webinars. As you can see, details are posted in the screen, and additional materials such as the summary videos will be posted in our social media sites and websites. So back to you, Francis.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, ICSC, to be part of this. Yeah, and keep safe, everyone.